Chapter 616. His voice was like an icy spring, coldly flowing in the air. "You're still so light." He didn't say the last word, as if saying it would dirty his mouth. After a pause, he coldly added, "Since that's the case, as you wish." With a gentle breeze, he was already gone. Ning Xuemore was the only one left lying on the bed in the huge bedroom. Damn, he ran away just like that. Did he just say that she was frivolous? Frivolous your head. I was carried around and touched by you bastards like a rag. Did I do it willingly? I didn't care about these bastards, but I became the frivolous one. What kind of bastard logic is this? Ning Xuemore's anger rose, and the good mood she had because she had regained her original appearance disappeared. She simply lifted the blanket and jumped off the bed, barefooted, and ran to the dressing mirror to look at her appearance. The mirror here wasn't the ordinary bronze mirror outside, but the mercury glass mirror used by modern people, which reflected people very clearly. What was shown in the mirror was a delicate face like a flower, with brows like the distant mountains, eyes like the ripples of autumn water, and lips like cherry blossoms. Her skin was like snow, and her eyes were as beautiful as a painting. She looked exactly the same as she did in her previous life. She let out a sigh of relief, feeling that the anger in her heart seemed to dissipate a little. She smiled at the mirror, and the girl in the mirror smiled back at her. Her bright eyes narrowed like crescent moons, and her light red lips curled upwards. She clearly had the appearance of a young girl, but her smile was bright and innocent, like a loli that people wanted to hold in the palm of their hands and protect. She didn't know how to do the complicated hairstyles of this era, so she just let her long hair down and trimmed it herself. After a while, she had a hairstyle that she was satisfied with. She looked at herself in the mirror, and it was the look she liked. She then looked at the rather loose nightgown on her body. It was made of snow-white material, and the simple and neat style was clearly someone's style. But it wasn't the style she liked. She looked around and finally found a few sets of women's clothes in a bedside cabinet. There were light yellow, light pink, snow white, and all kinds of styles. She picked out a set and compared it in front of the mirror, and felt that it was passable. Just as she was about to put it on, she lowered her head and felt like she was hit by a stick. The clothes in her hands fell to the ground. Her feet, which were originally like white jade crystals and could make men go crazy, were now in the shape of an old person's feet. Her skin was saggy, and there were light brown age spots on her feet. Her toes were like garlic cloves, pale and weak. How could this be? Ning Xuemore's hands were also trembling. She couldn't help but lean over and roll up the loose trousers. Chapter 617. Ning Xuemore hurriedly put on her clothes and shoes, opened the door, and came out. Only then did she realize that this was a separate courtyard. The snow-white courtyard walls were winding, and there were a few banana trees planted under the walls. In the courtyard, there was a piece of ink-black jade. One side was rough stone, and the other side was sparkling black jade. Under the sunlight, it shone with a crystal-clear luster. Ning Xuemore couldn't help but touch the black stone, and her heart skipped a beat. This was Hatian jade. And such a big piece. A piece of this quality jade the size of a fist was worth a lot, not to mention such a big one. Even if such a piece of jade was found, it would be treasured by collectors. But now, it was casually placed here as a fake mountain. It seemed that Rongyue Tianlan was really rich and overbearing. She was really a deity in the world. She casually threw out a piece and it was enough to make people fight over it. The courtyard's decoration was quaint and had a sense of the mountains and the countryside. This style didn't seem like Rongyue Tianlan's, but more like Han Shanue's. But at this time, Ning Xuemore didn't have time to think about this. She had to quickly find Han Shanyu and ask him what was going on. She went out of the courtyard and looked around. Her small courtyard was located at the top of a mountain, and there was a winding path downwards. Under the cover of the green trees, there were pavilions and terraces looming. Seeing the golden trees planted on both sides of the mountain road, Ning Xuemore knew that she was still on Rongyue Tianlan's carefree island. Where would Han Shanyu go in a rage? He should have gone to find Rongyue Tianlan to play chess, right? Ning Xuemore ran all the way down. Although her feet were still the feet of an old person, it didn't hinder her running, and she was still very fast. In the process of running, Ning Xuemore also felt that her mind power had recovered, and her body was as light as flying. She first used telepathy to contact Kirin. Kirin told her that it was bathing in a very big lake. It said that it had wanted to watch Han Shanyu heal her last night, but it was blocked by his barrier. No matter what, it could not enter. Helpless, it could only wander around. Ning Xuemore interrupted its nagging. "Where is God Han? Did you see that? No, didn't he have a wedding night with you? Shouldn't he be with you?" Kirin was even more confused than her. Ning Xuemore was speechless. It seemed like her and Han Shanyue's wedding night was confirmed. He was obviously trying to remove the disguise for her, so how did it become the wedding night? She was too lazy to explain to Kirin and interrupted it. "Then have you seen Island Master Rongyu?" "Yes, I saw him drinking tea under the red heart tree early in the morning. Bright red leaves that looked like hearts danced in the air." Under the big tree, Rongyu Tianlan was sitting under the tree, drinking tea in a light green robe. There was a book on his lap, and he looked very relaxed. Seeing Ning Xuemore rushing in, he was slightly stunned. Miss Ning." Ning Xuemore nodded and smiled brightly. "It's me. Good morning, brother Rongyu." Rongyu Tianlan's eyes flashed with surprise. When he first met Ning Xuemore, she was still an old lady with wrinkled skin and white hair. He also knew that her original body must be beautiful. He didn't expect that she would be so beautiful. In other words, it was difficult to describe her simply as beautiful. She was wearing a light pink dress, and her black hair covered her forehead. Her black hair was like satin hanging around her body. Chapter 618. Ning Xuemore had big eyes and long eyelashes. Her smile was like a crescent moon, bright and resplendent. Her red lips were plump like cherry blossoms. When the corners of her lips curled up, it was exceptionally sweet, like a child who didn't know the ways of the world. She was like a doll that made people let down their guard for no reason and only wanted to kiss her heart and lungs. Rongyu Tianlan boasted that he was a romantic and had seen all kinds of beauties. Naturally, his eyes were very sharp and very picky. His standards were also ridiculously high. Ordinary beauties couldn't enter his eyes. However, this girl made his eyes light up. Among the thousands of beauties he had seen, she might not be the most beautiful, but she had the most temperament and the one that people couldn't take their eyes off. Yunqi was also a pure and peerless beauty. Her facial features were even slightly more exquisite than the girl in front of him, but she was far from being as dazzling as the girl in front of him. Yunqi was like a clear stream, and the girl in front of him was like a fire lotus in full bloom in the ice and snow. Dazzling and beautiful, clear and alluring. Yes, clear and alluring. The two were originally contradictory, but strangely combined in one person, causing people to be inexplicably moved. Even Rongyu Tianlan, who was used to seeing beauties, faintly felt his heart palpitate. "Miss Ning is so beautiful. No wonder." Rongyu Tianlan paused and added in his heart, "No wonder Di's were, that 1,000-year-old iceberg, kept making exceptions for you." This sentence was unavoidably rude to the beauty, so Rongyu Tianlan changed his words halfway. "Miss Ning, you've recovered well." Ning Xuemore smiled faintly. "Not bad." She looked around and didn't see Han Shanyue's shadow. "Mr. Rongyu, have you seen Great God Han?" Rongyu Tianlan coughed. "He left the island for some matters." "Left? Did he just leave her here without saying a word?" What did he mean? He didn't want her as a shield. Or did he leave her here temporarily because he had other matters to attend to? Then what about her leg? When will he be back? Rongyu Tianlan shook his head. This, he didn't say. Di's behavior had always been unpredictable, and it was even more so this morning. Rong Yutian had just finished a round of martial arts when she turned around and saw Di's standing behind her. Although Di's had always been elusive, his sudden appearance startled Rongyu Tianlan. Di's was actually wearing a loose sleeping robe. It was true that this did not affect Di's beauty, but this was the first time Yu Tianlan had seen him so slovenly. After this night, he thought that he would be able to see a radiant Di's in high spirits. However, he didn't expect that Di's would still be able to cover the sky like a blanket. When Han Shanyu saw him, He only said one sentence to him: "I have something to do and have to go out. Take care of her." After that, the old man fluttered his sleeves and left. He was left with a bellyful of questions and no one to ask. Now that he had seen Ning Xuemore, he wanted to find a breakthrough through her. He quietly looked her up and down. After that night, she was still a virgin. Could it be that Dizuo's expression was because he was dissatisfied? Rong Yutian guessed in her heart. "Miss Ning, did you two quarrel?" Rong Yueshenlan asked tentatively. He actually felt that it was unlikely. With Dizuo's temperament, it was unlikely that he would quarrel with others. This was because he wouldn't get angry easily. Once he got angry, he would immediately extinguish it. He wouldn't do something as useless as quarreling. Chapter 619. Ning Xuemore shook her head. What she did with him didn't count as an argument, right? She just didn't know which of her words had provoked Master Han and made him leave in a huff. It seemed like her shield had blocked the most troublesome peach blossoms for him. He had achieved his goal, so he didn't care about her anymore. He threw her to his friend just like that. Did that mean she was free from now on? Ning Xuemore raised her hand and touched the snow-shaped cinnabar mole on her forehead. What about her heavenly marriage symbol? Also, what about her feet? "Miss Ning, is there something troubling you?" Rongyue Tianlan sensed that Ning Xuemore had something on her mind. Ning Xuemore's heart skipped a beat. Island Master Rongyue was the one who had thought of this method to remove the disguise technique. Perhaps he had other ways before her feet had recovered. She immediately spoke of her difficulties. "Island Master Rongyue, the rest of my body has recovered quite well, but my legs are still in their original strange state. You should have other ways, right?" Rongyue Tianlan was stunned and didn't speak for a while. He had clearly told Dizuo that once this method was started, it had to be removed from head to toe without stopping. Otherwise, all the previous efforts would be wasted, and it would be very difficult to recover from the parts that couldn't be recovered. He believed that Dizuo had listened to him. Why did he leave her with a future problem? Was he exhausted halfway, or did he have a bad taste for old people's feet? Well, the last one seemed unlikely. Who would have such a strong taste for old people's feet? Exhaustion didn't seem right either. He remembered that after Dizuo had finished casting the technique on Ning Xuemore, he had personally carried her out of the secret treatment room. Although Dizuo's face was pale, his footsteps were steady. It didn't seem like he was exhausted. Even if he had used up a lot of telekinesis, he should still have enough telekinesis to recover her feet. Then what about her feet? Could there be other reasons? "Miss Ning, your feet haven't recovered at all?" "Yes, they're still the same." "That's strange." Rongyue Tianlan frowned and pondered. He even forgot to wave his fan. Could it really be Dizuo's bad taste? Ning Xuemore's heart sank. She looked at her anxiously. Does Island Master Rongyue also have no other way? Rong Yutian was a little embarrassed and spread out her hands. "After all, I didn't see the specific situation." Before she could finish her sentence, her eyes widened. "Miss Ning." Without saying a word, Ning Xuemore took off one of her shoes and socks and showed it to him. "Now you see it." When going to the hospital to see a doctor, he naturally had to show the doctor his injury. Even if it was a slightly private place, he still had to show it to others sometimes, not to mention that it was just a foot. Ning Xuemore was even more open about it. Chapter 620. But now, Ning Xuemore actually revealed her feet in such a grandiose manner, showing it back to him, a complete stranger. This was simply an eye-opener for Rongyue Tianlan, so much so that she even had a bit of doubt towards Ning Xuemore's character. Rongyue Tianlan only glanced at her foot and quickly looked away. He said seriously, "Miss Ning, please don't be like this. Please put on your shoes and socks properly." He couldn't tease his friend's wife. Moreover, she was someone from Dizuo. He couldn't cross the line. Otherwise, Dizuo would definitely send him flying. "Now that Island Master has seen the symptoms of my foot, is there a way to recover it?" Ning Xuemore put on her shoes and socks. She was most concerned about this. "I think, you can ask your great god Han about this." Ning Xuemore lowered her eyes. "Island Master, You don't have a way. He wanted to ask that great god, but before he could ask, that person had already disappeared, didn't he? Romeo Tianlan thought for a moment. Miss Ning, please wait for a moment. He decided to contact Deizwe first. Romeo Tianlan went out. After a while, he came back and saw Ning Xuemo standing under the tree, talking to Kirin. The wind blew up her black hair and pink clothes. The fiery red leaves twirled around her. It was as beautiful as a painting. At this moment, he suddenly felt that this girl in front of him might be more suited to wear red clothes. This thought only flashed through his mind. He walked over. Miss Ning. Ning Xuemo stood up slightly and looked at him. Island Master, have you contacted Mr. Han? She actually guessed what he was doing just now. She was really smart. He shook his head. Mr. Han might be in a hurry. I couldn't contact him. He and Deizwe had a sound transmission talisman. Usually, they could keep in touch without any obstruction. This time, he didn't know why, but there was no answer on the other end. He couldn't do anything at the moment. Ning Xuemo smiled. Forget it. In any case, thank you for your kindness in removing my disguise. Xuemo will not disturb you any longer. Please send Xuemo and Kirin out of the island. She wanted to leave. How could this be? Before Deizwe left, he had clearly entrusted her to him. If he let her go like this, where would he find her when Deizwe came back? Miss Ning, your body hasn't fully recovered yet. You still need to rest for a few more days. Why don't you stay here and wait until you've recovered before you leave? Ning Xuemo shook her head. I don't think so. I'll have to recuperate after I go out. Besides, I still need to find a doctor. She didn't believe that no one in this big world could cure her foot. She wanted others to look at her feet. Romeo Tianlan did not dare to let her go and tried every means to make her stay. However, Ning Xuemo had already made up her mind. Romeo Tianlan had no choice but to use his trump card. Miss Ning, you don't need to go to other places to seek treatment. I have a way. This sentence was like a shot of adrenaline for Ning Xuemo. Her eyes immediately sparkled. Romeo Tianlan looked at her pair of sparkling eyes and felt a little pressured. She muttered to herself for a moment and said, There is a way, but this method is very torturous for you. That kind of torment is not something that ordinary people can endure. Therefore, I feel a little embarrassed and don't want to do it. Chapter 621. Ning Xuemo took a deep breath and said, Mister, why don't you tell me about it? She had experienced all kinds of torment when she was a secret agent. Ordinary torment could not scare her. Rongi Weshenlan glanced at her and asked, Was your foot seriously injured before? Did you use the Chilean armor to recover? Yes. That's right. Is this the reason why my foot could not recover? Ning Xuemo suddenly understood. Rongi Weshenlan nodded and said, Yes. Although the Chilean armor healed your injury, it also changed the nature of the skin on your feet. Therefore, it could not be treated at the same time as other parts of your body. Ning Xuemo understood. In other words, the Chilean armor had changed the genes on her feet. Different genes had different treatment methods. After knowing the exact cause, Rongi Weshenlan finally told her his treatment plan. His plan did sound cruel. However, Ning Xuemo gritted her teeth and agreed to it in order to recover. Although this method made Ning Xuemo suffer, it was not risky. Ning Xuemo's life was not in danger. Therefore, Rongi Weshenlan contacted Han Shanyu again to ask for his advice. After failing to contact him, Rongi Weshenlan decided on his own. Anyway, Ning Xuemo agreed to it. He could not bear to let such a beautiful girl have such a big flaw. If Deizwe came back, the beauty would have recovered. At most, he would blame himself for being reckless and acting on his own. It should not be a big deal. Have you seen the boiling purple sludge? This time, Ning Xuemo's horizons were broadened. The bubbling purple sludge was placed in a small pool made of special materials. A strong, pungent smell of medicine filled the entire room. It was so strong that it made people dizzy. Kirin tilted its head and looked at the pool of medicine. It could not suppress its curiosity and stretched out a claw to explore the sludge. Then, As if he had been struck by lightning, he quickly retreated and said, "It's hot. 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 Hot." Ning Xuemore wore a set of special clothes and stood by the small pool. Looking at the boiling liquid, her heart was filled with uncertainty. The temperature is so high. Won't she be cooked if she jumps in? Rong Yutian stood not far away from her. The temperature of this medicinal soup will always be at this temperature and will not change. If you wear these clothes, your skin won't be scalded. But you can feel the temperature of this medicinal soup. Cough, cough, I said that you will suffer a little. It's not too late for you to regret it now. My whole body is going to be soaked in. Rongyue Tianlan nodded her head cautiously. That's right. You have to let this medicinal paste completely cover your body. Even your face can't be exposed outside. After you jump in, the medicinal paste will wrap you up like an airtight clay figurine. You have to stay in there for 2 days. Your body will be reconstructed and your legs will naturally recover. At that time, we'll be able to shatter the godly soil and complete our mission. Why did it sound so much like making beggar's chicken? Ning Xuemore was embarrassed. She was sure that Island Master Rongyue would not cheat her. For a pair of healthy legs, she would go all out. The clothes she was wearing were like soft silk armor. It wrapped her tightly from head to toe, but it was very breathable. She could also see and hear the sounds outside. She first tried to reach her hand into the mud. The scorching heat spread throughout her body like lightning. She gritted her teeth and endured for a moment. Then, she retracted her hand and checked carefully. Her skin did not show any signs of being scalded. He seemed to have been enlightened and was instantly enlightened. His figure flashed and he appeared beside the little Cheline. He slapped it on the head and said, "That's right. Why didn't I think of that? Haha, little apple, I didn't expect you to be so smart." In his excitement, he didn't control the strength of his hand accurately. This slap made Kirin somersault and almost rolled into the boiling pool. Fortunately, Ning Xuemore's hands and eyes were quick. She managed to grab its horn in time and stopped its rolling momentum. Kirin was so scared that it broke out in a sweat. It jumped up and shouted angrily, "Are you trying to kill me?" Chapter 623. Rongyue Tianlan was awakened by Kirin's words, but he wasn't angry after being scolded by it. He patted its head comfortingly and said, "I'm sorry, my hand slipped." Kirin proudly turned its head to avoid his hand. It wouldn't let anyone pat its head. Since they had found a solution, the two of them didn't hesitate anymore. Before casting the spell, Rongyue Tianlan told Ning Xuemore that he would take out her soul and seal it in the force field, leaving only one soul in her body to look after the house. The rest of her soul could stay in the house and watch from above. Ning Xuemore nodded and looked at Rongyue Tianlan with a complicated gaze. She heard that this soul extraction technique could only be done by deities who had cultivated their telekinesis to the heavenly stage. It seemed that Rongyue Tianlan had also cultivated to the heavenly stage. However, probably because he was detached from worldly affairs and didn't enter the mortal world, he wasn't famous on this continent. If Han Shanyu hadn't brought her here, she wouldn't have known that there was such a person on this continent. It seemed that the information obtained by Chong Kong Nation wasn't accurate. Those who were recorded were all famous. Weren't there a lot of people like Rongyue Tianlan in this continent? This was the so-called otherworldly expert. Then was the one who established the blood contract between her and the little Cheline also this kind of expert? It seemed that there were all kinds of hidden dragons and crouching tigers on this continent. She wondered what level Yunxi's telekinesis had reached. There was also Xue Yilan. That bastard's martial arts were also very strange. His cultivation might have also reached the heavenly stage. Thinking of Xue Yilan, she suddenly remembered something and her expression changed slightly. When she was removing the disguise technique, Han Shanyu touched all over her body. Then, when this bastard changed her appearance, did he also touch her all over? Thinking of his hand touching all over her body, Ning Xuemore had goosebumps all over her body. She paused and gritted her teeth to ask this question. Island Lord Rongyue, is the method to remove the disguise technique the same? Although it was a bit embarrassing to ask this question, if she didn't ask, she was afraid that she would always have doubts in her heart. Rongyue Tianlan shook her head and said, "That's not necessary. This is called a disguise technique, but in fact, he gave you a kind of poison. After giving you this medicine, he used his own blood to activate this kind of poison. It will make you become an old woman in 2 hours. So he didn't touch her all over her body." Ning Xuemo finalis. Who was this Shueyu Ilan? To be able to play Jiyu so well, could he be the ancestor of Jiyu? What about his own body? Did he also use this kind of disguise technique to become a wretched old man? Was it so troublesome for him? Rong Yutian shook her head. I didn't see the person's specific appearance, so it's hard to judge. Maybe he himself, but UTSS right. This was indeed a possibility. Ning Xuemo nodded her head. She secretly swore in her heart that if she ever saw that bastard Shuerilan again one day, she would definitely destroy his face that could bring disaster to a country, and then chop him into 8 pieces. That bastard almost destroyed her. She had a big grudge with him. The doubts in her heart were solved and Ning Xuemo's heart relaxed a lot. Following Rongyue Tianlan's instructions, she sat down cross-legged. After a complicated operation by Rongyue Tianlan, after a quarter of an hour, Ning Xuemo's soul was successfully extracted. Only a part of it was left in her body. Chapter 624. Rong Yueshenlan waved her sleeves again and set up a green spherical enchantment, carefully placing Ning Xuemo's soul in it. It felt weird to appear in the state of a soul. Ning Xuemo felt like a wisp of smoke, a gust of wind, floating in the enchantment. If the green enchantment didn't stop her, she might have flown out involuntarily. She curiously lay on the enchantment and watched Rong Yueshenlan raise her hand to lift her sitting body in the air and slowly put her down into the bubbling mud. She watched as her body was slowly swallowed by the mud inch by inch. The mud in the small pool seemed to have smelled something delicious and surged in the direction of her body, swirling around. Gradually, a mud shell formed around her body, like a small round coffin rolling up and down in the mud. This scene made all of Ning Xuemo's hairs stand on end. Fortunately, her soul was lifted out. Fortunately, she couldn't feel it. Otherwise, the feeling of rolling and steaming in there was really unbearable. She just didn't know if her body would be cooked after breaking the mud shell. Steamed beauty was also a good dish. She looked at Rong Yueshenlan. Rong Yueshenlan was standing by the pool, afraid that something would happen to her and he wouldn't be able to explain himself, so he had been quietly guarding her. From time to time, he used his consciousness to sense Ning Xuemo's body in the mud shell. Probing her vitality, his consciousness was also quite taxing, and he also had to feel the high temperature inside, so every time he probed, he would sweat profusely. It looked very tiring. Ning Xuemo didn't feel anything. Her soul stayed in the green enchantment, but she felt a little bored. She looked at Kirin for a while, and then looked at Rong Yueshenlan for a while. She saw Rong Yueshenlan's hard work. A person with such high skills could make it so hot just by probing with her consciousness. If her original soul was inside, she was afraid that she would have wanted to commit suicide. Fortunately, there was Kirin's reminder. At the critical moment, it turned out that there were times when it didn't drop the chain. Ning Xuemo looked at Rong Yueshenlan with gratitude, and when she looked at Kirin, it was gentle. Kirin was originally very playful, but at this time, it was worried about its master. Its eyes were also wide open, staring at the mud shell without blinking. Ning Xuemo's main body was in the state of a soul. If it didn't use special methods, it couldn't see it all the time. In the first 4 hours, Kirin used telepathy to chat with Ning Xuemo every 15 minutes to ask her about her situation. Naturally, Ning Xuemo's answer reassured it. Rong Yueshenlan was able to see her soul. In these 2 hours, he would occasionally raise his eyes to look at Ning Xuemo who was inside the barrier. Seeing that she was fine, he felt relieved. There was a sign that she was gradually was Xuemo's body. After Ru Yueshenlan kept watch here for 3 hours, he saw that everything was indeed back to normal. It was a little boring for him to keep watch here. He took out the chessboard, sat there, and played chess with himself. Ning Xuemo watched from inside the enchantment. She was itching to play, so she spoke up to represent one side to play. It was Ru Yueshenlan's first time playing chess with a soul. It was quite fun, so he let her represent the black side, and he took the white piece himself. One person and one soul played chess there. Ning Shuamore was in the state of a soul, and her mind wasn't as clear as it was normal. So when she played chess with Ru Yueshenlan this time, she lost 2 out of 3 games. Chapter 625. Playing Go consumed a lot of brain power. Ning Shuamore was in the state of a soul, so the consumption was particularly large. After 5 games, she was so tired that she wanted to sleep. Rong Yueshenlan finally noticed her discomfort. He saw that she was swaying in the force field and couldn't maintain her shape. She was obviously in a state of overexertion. He couldn't help but hit his head with the fan. For so many years, he had been dealing with the strongest people. No matter what he did, there was always a kind of habitual thinking in it. He always forgot that Ning Shuamore was just an ordinary person. An ordinary person's soul couldn't be so exhausted. He hurriedly put away the chessboard. "Miss Ning, your soul will be hurt like this. It's better to recuperate in the force field. You can meditate to recover." Souls could meditate. Ning Shuamore tried to regulate her breath in the force field. She closed her eyes slightly and meditated for a while. Sure enough, the tiredness lessened a lot. Rong Yueshenlan saw her like this and breathed a sigh of relief. He used his consciousness to check her body again. Her body was also fine. He was about to find something to do to pass the time when a child reported from outside. "Island Master, Palace Master Yunshi is here." Yunshi actually came back. It seemed that she was going to get rid of the knot in her heart. Rongyue Tianlan's heart was filled with joy. In the end, he was worried about his old friend, so he instructed Ning Shuamore to focus on recuperating inside the barrier. When the time came, he would naturally let her out. He turned back to look for Kirin, but found that the little guy's shadow was gone. It turned out that Kirin saw that Ning Shuamore's soul had been playing chess with Rong Yueshenlan. It really had nothing to do with it. It was also a playful thing, so it ran out to play. Rong Yueshenlan didn't see it, but he guessed that it had run away. He couldn't help but rub his forehead with the fan. He gave Ning Shuamore a few more instructions before going out. Only Ning Shuamore was left in the big hall. She sat in the force field and meditated for a while. Then, she looked at the mud shell rolling in the mud. She yawned in boredom. This kind of time was a bit unbearable. She might as well sleep first. Rongyue Tianlan had said before that sleeping was also a way for souls to cultivate. She simply lay down inside the force field. The force field set up by Rong Yueshenlan was very authentic. It could change its shape according to her movements inside. When she lay down, it also became a long strip. It flowed around Ning Shuamore. Ning Shuamore couldn't help poking it with her finger. It was soft like a balloon. She poked a few more times, and a question flashed through her mind. "I wonder if this barrier will break as easily as an eggshell?" She poked a few more times out of boredom. In her boredom, her thoughts began to drift. Where did that bastard Shuailan go after he escaped? If she were to catch him one day, she would make sure that he would often be immobilized and tortured by others. Was Han Shanyu really not going to turn back? It had already been a day and a night, and he hadn't even contacted his good friends. As expected of the legend of this continent, he was able to let go so easily. Looks like it's time for my shield concubine to retire. But what about the wedding? Oh right, she was now in the state of a soul. Was the cinnabar mole still there? She couldn't help but raise her hand to touch it. In the state of a soul, her sense of touch wasn't sensitive. She touched nothing. She smiled to herself. The soul had no physical body. She couldn't touch it. She couldn't even sense where her body was. It seemed that she could take any shape she wanted. Chapter 626. Ning Shuamore curled up into a ball, stretched into a straight line like a stick, and then into the shape of a flower. She realized that as long as she thought about it, the shape of her soul would immediately change, and it would be exactly the same as what she imagined. That was fun. This feeling was not something that she could experience at any time. She suddenly had an idea. Could she turn into a sharp sword and cut through the wizardry barrier? Just as she thought about it, she heard a soft thud. Her body became light, and a green light flashed in front of her eyes. When she realized what had happened, she was already outside the wizardry barrier. Ning Xuemore was speechless. Wasn't this barrier too much like a piece of paper? She had just thought about it, and she immediately broke through the barrier. Was her soul too powerful, or was his wizardry barrier too weak? Ning Xuemore could not figure it out at the moment. She circled around the hall and looked at the mud shell. She could not help but fly down to take a closer look. Unexpectedly, before she could really get close to the mud shell, she felt a strong suction force from the mud shell, and it suddenly pulled her down. Ning Xuemore was almost pulled down by the suction force. She hurriedly flew up and finally broke free from the suction force. She was still in a state of shock as she stuck her body to the wizardry barrier and looked at the mud shell. Suddenly, she realized that the mud shell was her body. Once she got close to it, she would naturally be attracted to it. Damn it, I was almost sucked in. I almost went in there to taste the high temperature and the feeling of being suffocated to death. She did not dare to get close to the mud shell. Her body floated up and circled around the hall a few times. She felt that her body was a little scattered, as if her arms and legs were going to be separated from her body. Oh no, her soul was going to be scattered. Once the soul was scattered, she did not know if it could be gathered again. This was Ning Xuemore's last thought in the hall. After this thought, her vision blurred, and she did not know anything else. The blood-red fog. There was no end to it. The world was completely covered by the blood-red fog, and the air was filled with the smell of blood. Ning Xuemore felt as if she was walking in such a blood fog. From time to time, all kinds of strange noises could be heard coming from the blood fog. There were screams that sounded like humans and beasts. In the depths of the fog, there was even the sound of teeth tearing through flesh. The combination of these strange sounds made the hair of those who walked among them stand on end. Blood mist filled the air, and the gloomy aura was chilling. This place seemed to have been abandoned by God. Sunlight could no longer shine here. It was terrifyingly cold. Ning Xuemore could not help but shrink back. Although she was bold, being alone in such an environment, she still felt a little scared. She couldn't tell the direction in the fog, so she could only choose a random direction and run. She couldn't wait to get out of this demonic area. The blood mist in front of her suddenly rolled like waves, and there seemed to be footsteps rushing towards her. She was stunned and instinctively dodged to the side. A young man in white rushed out of the blood mist in front of her. This young man in white seemed to have just gone through a fight. His white robe was stained with blood, and his hair was messy, covering his face. Ning Xuemore could not see his appearance clearly, but she could faintly feel that this young man should be very beautiful. This young man looked to be around 12 or 13 years old, but his skills were already extraordinary. As he ran, there were all kinds of beasts that came out of the blood mist to bite him, but they were all dealt with in a few moves. Chapter 627. Ning Xuemore was hiding in the dark. She had only seen him fight a few times, and she was sure that this young man was a ruthless character. In the battle, he was willing to let himself be injured in order to quickly finish off his enemies. For example, there was a very cunning snake. It flew around the young man like lightning, and when the young man was fighting with other monsters, it would bite the young man. Once it was bitten, it would run away immediately. It did not want to continue fighting. After the young man suffered a few losses, he simply ignored it and focused on fighting with other monsters. He was attacked a few more times by the snake. The snake did not suffer any losses. The more it attacked, the bolder it became. Slowly, its body could stay on the young man's body for a longer time when it bit him. At the last time, when it bit the young man's skin, it sucked a mouthful of his blood. A sudden change happened at that moment. The young man, who had been ignoring it, suddenly reached out and grabbed the snake's vital point. The snake was shocked when its vital point was caught. It struggled in his hand and said, "Old Six, you can't kill me. I'm your younger brother. I'm your younger brother." Younger brother? The young man chuckled. Ning Xuemore felt a chill in her heart. For some reason, she felt that the young man's laughter was very cold. It was as if he was going to make a big move in the next moment. Ning Xuemore was right. After the young man laughed, he directly broke the snake's neck. The snake's blood sprayed all over him. This scene was very cruel, but Ning Xuemore did not know why she was very excited when she saw it. It was as if she also liked the taste of blood. She could not help but follow the young man. She watched him kill in the blood fog and saw the blood of all kinds of monsters sprayed on his body. She watched his white clothes turn into red clothes. The blood fog seemed to be endless. The sound of ghosts crying in the blood fog became louder. The young man encountered more ambushes. After all, he was not made of iron. His body seemed to be getting weaker and weaker. Finally, after being ambushed by another monster, he sat down with a thud. The blood mist seemed to have faded a little. 5 green-robed men walked out of the blood mist one after another and surrounded the young man from before. From their conversation, Ning Xuemore knew that the 5 green-robed men were the elder brothers of the young man. They were reprimanding the young man for his evil deed of killing his brothers. The young man didn't say a word at first, but after they finished scolding him, he smiled gently. Ning Xuemore couldn't see his face clearly, but for some reason, she felt that his smile was very enchanting. After the young man smiled, he only said a few words. "You guys never treated me as a brother. You called me a bastard." His words made Ning Xuemore feel sad for no reason. It was as if she had seen the ugly duckling in fairy tales. As expected, those youths had mocking expressions on their faces. "You're a bastard. Although you were hatched from the same nest as us, you were different from us from the moment you were born. You are white, and you have an ugly lump on your head. It's already very kind of mother to let you stay, yet you still want to ask for more? How dare you covet the position of the king of my clan, with just you?" Ning Xuemore calmly listened to their conversation and finally understood what was going on. This young man should also be from the Snake clan. He was born in the same nest as these green-robed men and was discriminated against since he was young. However, he was very talented and ambitious. She did not know why he let it slip that he wanted to fight for the position of the Snake King when he grew up. This sentence brought him a fatal disaster, and the king of the Snake clan issued an order to kill him. Chapter 628. 10,000 snakes moved out and formed this blood fog array, wanting to kill this young man inside. Even his so-called blood brothers were among the snakes that wanted to kill him. These 5 brothers were also very cunning. They only appeared when the young man in white was exhausted. They obviously wanted to take advantage of the situation. Not a single word was exchanged. Another bloody battle ensued. That young man was clearly so weak that he was about to die, but at this moment, it was as if he had been injected with stimulants and was reinvigorated. Once again, he fought with his life on the line against these 5 people. Ning Xuemore crossed her arms and watched from the side. She began to admire this young man. Ruthless, ruthless. He was also very scheming and had many tricks up his sleeves when facing his enemies. His weakness just now was not real. It was just a ploy to lure the snake out of its hole. Now that the snake was lured out, he naturally fought with his life on the line. In the battle, his tricks were endless. Slowly, the 5 brothers who originally had the upper hand were killed one by his tricks. When only one of the 5 brothers was left, he finally realized that things were not going well. He turned around and wanted to run, but was captured by him. After that person was captured, he begged the young man in white, playing the family card. He said that he was forced by others to come, but in his heart, he had always treated him as a brother. This person was very eloquent. He recalled the past with this young man. From these words and the reaction of the young man in white, Ning Xuemore knew that the one who survived was this young man's 3rd brother. He usually took good care of him. For example, when he was punished to kneel for no reason, 3rd brother had secretly given him food. Although it was just scraps of food, it was enough for him to survive and not starve to death. There were 7 or 8 similar incidents. The young man's murderous aura finally calmed down. He said, "All right, on account of our past relationship, I'll spare your life." Then, he let go of the hand that was holding his 3rd brother's neck. Ning Xuemore's heart jumped. Her intuition told her that this was bad. Her intuition had always been very accurate. This time was no exception. Before the third brother's body landed on the ground, the poisonous blade in his hand had already pierced through the young man's abdomen. That young man in white was also ruthless. Even after suffering such a heavy injury, he did not care. Instead, he suddenly pounced forward and grabbed his third brother's neck. This time, he didn't show any mercy at all. Instead, he directly cut off all of third brother's chances of survival. His third brother, like his other brothers, returned to his original form after death and remained motionless. Due to his reckless charge, the dark green poisonous blade pierced through his body and came out from his back. Fresh blood dyed the remaining white of his white robe red, and the white robe was completely dyed red. After all, he was still a child. After killing so many people in one breath, he finally couldn't hold on any longer and fell to the ground with a plop. Perhaps his ruthlessness just now had scared off the other pursuers. This young man had been lying on the ground for a full quarter of an hour, but no one took the opportunity to attack him. He struggled a few times on the ground, looking like he really wanted to get up. However, he was obviously exhausted from his injuries this time. He struggled a few times but still couldn't get up. He simply lay there and raised his blood-stained hand to look at it. Why? Why can't you tolerate me? Why? He seemed to be laughing and crying at the same time. His hands were stained with someone else's blood or his own. Drops of blood dripped down. Chapter 629. Fresh blood dripped onto the neck and body of the white-clothed youth. His entire body seemed to have been fished out from blood. More people walked out from the blood fog. These people obviously wanted to harm him as well. They fanned out and surrounded him. There were more than 10 of them. Their eyes flashed with cold murderous intent. The youth naturally sensed the approach of these people, but he was already in despair. He did not want to get up again. Blood flowed like a river, but he could not fight for any chance of survival. No matter how hard he tried, he would not be able to escape death today. Probably with this thought in mind, the youth lay there without moving. He just closed his eyes slightly. Clang, clang. A few zither sounds suddenly came from the blood fog. The zither sounds were clear and melodious. It was not a tune, but it strangely dispersed the blood fog and returned everything to its original state. The zither sounds came from above Ning Shuamor's head, startling Ning Shuamor. She looked in the direction of the zither sounds and saw a big tree not far behind her. The branches and leaves of the tree were all withered and burnt, leaving only the bare tree trunk like a horned dragon. On the tree trunk, a young girl in red sat diagonally. She did not know why, but the moment Ning Shuamor saw the young girl in red, her heart felt like it was hit by a big hammer. The young girl was dressed in a fiery red dress. She wore a hood of the same color on her head. Her face was hidden in the shadow of the hood, making it impossible for people to see her face clearly. On her knees was a dark blue zither. The color of the zither was like the waves of the sea. It shone faintly under the moonlight. The young girl was leaning against the tree trunk. Her hands were lazily strumming the zither strings. Her bare feet were swaying there. It was a full moon night. Under the moonlight, she looked like an elf, a dark elf. The people who were about to surround the youth became restless. Countless gazes looked towards the young girl. The dying youth also looked over. From his direction, the most conspicuous thing he could see was her feet. Her small feet were as white as snow, and there were silver chains around her ankles. There were 2 small silver bells hanging from the chains, and as her small feet moved, the silver bells jingled. Coupled with the sound of the zither that she casually played, there was actually a kind of soul-stirring power that made everyone's eyes widen. The sound of the zither seemed to have a great influence on these people. Their tempers became impetuous, and they all asked for the girl's name. The young girl casually plucked the strings of the zither and said in a cold voice, "So many people bullying one person, it's really annoying." She didn't know if it was because of the sound of the zither, but the group of people became very irritable. This girl's ordinary sentence actually provoked 4 or 5 men to rush towards her. "If you don't like it, then stay together. Play with us." Those 4 or 5 people's kung fu was obviously not bad. Their figures were like a whirlwind as they rushed over. The young girl was not in a hurry. When they got close, Her fingers suddenly plucked the zither strings. This time, it wasn't a musical note that came out, but a light red wave of light. This light red wave of light was like a meteor or lightning. After the light wave flashed, the 4 or 5 people who rushed over had already lost their heads. Their bodies ran forward 2 steps on the ground, and then fell to the ground with a loud bang. Devil ancestor. Devil ancestor. She is the devil ancestor. God, she is the devil ancestor. The rest of the people shouted. The white-clothed youth lying on the ground suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes flashed with passion as he looked at the young girl. Chapter 630. Those people didn't care about attacking the young man anymore. They retreated step by step, obviously wanting to escape. The girl in red looked at the young man and smiled. I've taken care of a few for you. The rest is up to you. Of course, you can let them go as long as you don't have to worry about the consequences. The young man took a deep breath and finally stood up again. I won't let them go. Okay, then it's up to you. Her fingers plucked the strings again, and waves of light red waves gushed out. In the blink of an eye, a barrier was set up around them, stopping those who wanted to escape. The girl said happily, no one is allowed to leave until the winner is decided. Don't worry, no matter who wins or loses this time, I won't interfere. The final winner can stay. Everyone looked at each other. Everyone knew that this time, it was not about winning or losing, but about their lives. Losing meant death. It was yet another battle of life and death. One by one, the young man's men fell to the ground. Flowers of blood burst out one after another. Every flower of blood represented the end of a life. It was cruel but beautiful. After an unknown amount of time, when the dust once again settled, the large field was littered with the corpses of several long snakes. Only 2 people were left standing. One was an old man in green, and the other was the young man in red. The young man in red was indeed an arrow at the end of its flight. Although he was standing, there were deep and shallow wounds all over his body. His body was shaking, as if he would fall down immediately if the wind blew. Ning Shuamore knew that she seemed to have entered an illusion. In this illusion, she could see other people, but they obviously couldn't see her. She could just stand aside and watch. Until now, she couldn't help but admire the young man's stubbornness. He was clearly exhausted to the extreme, and his kung fu was clearly not the strongest among these people, but it was precisely because of this that he was able to kill each and every one of them. Ruthless, cunning, and daring to fight. He had all these factors. He was not tall enough, but the murderous aura he exuded made the old man in front of him tremble. That old man was more cunning. Just now, when everyone went forward to besiege him, he stayed in the outer circle and only attacked the young man when he was cold. Therefore, his stamina consumption was the least, and he was still in peak condition. He circled around the young man, looking for his weakness. The young man's eyes were almost covered with blood, but he didn't dare to blink. He didn't even dare to wipe it with his hands. He was afraid that if he raised his hand, he would give others a chance to deal him a fatal blow. A drop of blood finally rolled down from the tip of his eyebrows and fell into his eyes. The youth couldn't help but blink. The old man took advantage of this opportunity to rush over and slash at the young man's neck. Ding! The sound of a zither suddenly rang out in the air. The old man jumped in fright and quickly turned to look at the young girl who had been watching from the side. But before he could see the girl's face clearly, his arms suddenly flew out. That young man had taken advantage of this moment to make a move. His grasp of the opportunity was extremely precise. If he had acted a second earlier or a second later, he would not have been able to achieve this effect. It was a perfect match for the young girl's zither. Chapter 631. The old man suddenly opened his eyes wide and stared at the young girl unwillingly. You said that you wouldn't help either side. The young girl laughed. Her laughter was as clear as a silver bell. I didn't help. I just played the zither because my hands were itchy. The old man wanted to say something else, but he would never be able to because the young man's sword slashed across and cut off his neck cleanly. All the pursuers were dead. The young man finally breathed a sigh of relief. He raised his head and looked at the young girl in red. Devil ancestor? The young girl in red shook her small feet and tilted her head to look at him. She smiled. Take a guess. The young man was stunned. The young girl laughed again. Her laughter was like a silver bell, and it still had the innocence of a young girl. I've seen a good show today. All right, you can run for your life. Her figure flashed and fluttered like a red cloud. She landed lightly and turned around to leave. The young man immediately took a step forward. I haven't thanked Devil Ancestor for saving my life. The young girl tilted her head and looked at him. I didn't do anything. It's mainly you who saved yourself. She looked at him up and down. I think you're not bad. You're a talent. How about you follow me? The young man was stunned. He didn't expect her to make such a request. What? You can be my subordinate. I can teach you martial arts. The young girl smiled. The young man instinctively wanted to refuse. However, the young girl suddenly waved her sleeve at him. A red light flashed and the young man disappeared. A small white snake covered in bruises appeared on the spot. Although it was a white snake, there was a small bulge on its head. It looked a little funny. The young girl seemed to be stunned. She bent down and picked up the small white snake. She put it in front of her eyes and looked at it carefully. The small white snake seemed to be shy. It curled up its body and hissed. It was flustered and exasperated. It threatened, "Let go of me." It struggled in her small hands, but it couldn't get out of her 5 fingers no matter how hard it struggled. The young girl's small hand poked the small bulge on its head. Your small bulge is so pretty. The small white snake almost wanted to hide its head under its body. Its voice was even more angry. Don't make fun of me. I'm not making fun of you. I've never seen a snake with a bump on its head. The young girl giggled, her laughter even more crisp than a silver bell. But it's really pretty. I like it. The scales on the little snake's body were almost red. It tried its best to return to its human form, but it was obviously unable to do so under the girl's control. If you laugh at me again, I'll kill you too. In its anger, it finally revealed its childish nature and said something that was not very intimidating. The girl obviously did not take its threat to heart. She looked at it carefully for a moment and seemed to have discovered a new continent. She pointed at the upper part of its body and said, you have several small bumps on your body. 1, 2, 3, 6. Including the one on your head, there are 7 in total. The little white snake's entire body started to tremble. These few bags were the things that it wanted to hide the most, but it didn't expect that the girl would count them out one by one. It suddenly said, "You are not the demon ancestor. The demon ancestor should be dignified and powerful, not so mischievous and mischievous." The girl was stunned. She suddenly laughed. "You have good eyesight. Let me go as soon as possible. Otherwise, I don't care who you are. I'll take your life." The small white snake was angered by her teasing. Chapter 632. Bullshit. The girl stretched out her beautiful finger and flicked it. "I can pinch you to death with a wave of my hand." The white snake was speechless. It was still a child after all, and it was about to faint from anger. "Hey, do you want to be my subordinate or not? If you follow me, no one will dare to bully you in the future. Being my subordinate is very good." The girl spoke again and stretched out her hand to pinch the soft bulge on its body as if she had found a happy toy. The white snake had a proud temper, so it simply straightened its body and pretended to be dead, no longer speaking. "Are you really not willing? I was the one who saved you. Logically speaking, shouldn't you repay me with your body?" The girl pinched the small bulge on its head again. Her last sentence shocked the white snake. It shook its body and moved its head to avoid the girl's mischievous fingers. "Didn't you say that you didn't save me? Did I save myself? I don't need to repay you with my body. You have a backbone." The girl laughed again and finally let it go. She threw it to the ground again. "I don't like to force people. If you don't want to, then forget it." She turned around and was about to leave. "Wait." The young man's voice came from behind. The girl turned around and tilted her head to look at him who had returned to his human form. You regret it. You agree to be my subordinate. The young man took a breath and said seriously, I won't be your subordinate, but I can always be by your side to protect you and not let anyone bully you. The girl snorted disdainfully at his words. Protect me. With your martial arts, you can't even resist 2 of my fingers. I will become stronger. The young man said word by word, I just lack opportunities. I am not worse than anyone else. The girl slowly turned around, and her expression seemed to become serious. You have a backbone. I will wait for the day you become stronger. Her sparkling eyes fell on him. The young man straightened his body and looked at her with the same stubbornness. The girl smiled and tilted her head to look at him. I can take you in. As for whether you can stay by my side, that depends on whether you have the ability to do so in the future. She raised her hand and flicked her finger lightly. There was a faint explosion in the air, and 6 men in black appeared out of thin air. They stood around the young girl and bowed together. Master, what are your orders? The girl glanced back at the youth covered in blood and said indifferently, this person. I'll leave him to you. 10 years later, I will see the results of your training. He turned around and disappeared. The young man stood where he was and looked at the place where she disappeared. His fingers slowly clenched into fists. Ning Xuemore also stared blankly at this scene. That young man looked so down and out that she had a faint impulse to comfort him. She took a step forward, and the scene in front of her completely changed. What happened next made Ning Xuemore feel like she was watching a fast-paced movie. Scenes after scenes flashed by. And in every scene, the red-clothed girl was wearing a red dress and a hood. She was either playing the zither under the moonlight, dancing under a large tree, or sitting high up in the palace, hugging her knees and looking up at the moon in a daze. This girl's laughter was like a silver bell. She looked very lively and even naive. But it was also filled with a faint sense of loneliness and desolation. It was a kind of loneliness of being high up, with no friends and no confidants. Chapter 633. The lone wolf-like young man in white no longer appeared in the picture, but the point of view seemed to be the young man in white's point of view. He was in a humble dark place, looking up at the bright red, the only bright color in his life. The picture flashed very quickly, as if the years were shuttling back and forth. Winter and summer alternated in the picture. In this scene, Ning Xuemore still couldn't see the young girl's face clearly. She only faintly felt that she was very beautiful. Her face was hidden very deeply in the hood. Occasionally, she would see her black hair covering her forehead. That black hair was like black satin, leaving a deep impression. The young girl seemed to like the color red very much. Every time she appeared, it was a deep red. Her smile and frown seemed to light up the dim background. Whose eyes would it burn? Ning Xuemore was also looking at the young girl. She didn't know what to feel in her heart. It was as if this young girl was her former self. It was so familiar that it made her heart palpitate. Finally, the scene slowed down in the midst of an assassination. The young girl seemed to have a lot of enemies. She was often assassinated. Fortunately, she was highly skilled and had a secret guard by her side to protect her. Basically, every assassination attempt ended in failure. Because of the frequent assassinations and the assassin's skills, the secret guards by her side were replaced very quickly. The old ones fell, and the new ones took their place. Occasionally, the young girl was forced to make a move. Every time she made a move, it was a fatal move. She didn't leave any leeway for her opponents. She basically used the sound of the zither to kill people. Every light red wave was a fatal weapon. Like a harvester, she reaped the lives of those assassins. After every operation, she seemed to be a little dejected and tired. She stared at her hands for a long time, lost in thought. Then she would wash her hands over and over again, as if that could wash away the blood and the unpleasant past. She didn't say a word, but Ning Xuemore understood her thoughts in an instant. She didn't want to kill people. She didn't want to be contaminated with blood. But the situation forced her. If she didn't kill people, they would kill her. Every assassination was a battle of life and death. She was merciful to her enemies, but she was ruthless to herself. It was another full moon night. Another assassination was coming. This time, there were many assassins, and they were all very powerful. The guards around the red-clothed girl fell down one by one. The red-clothed girl stood high up, and the moonlight stretched her lonely shadow very, very long. She finally took out her zither again. Just as she was about to play, the scene below suddenly took a shocking turn. A red shadow and a sharp sword pierced into the group of assassins. Faint golden waves of light flashed among the black assassins. Every wave of light would cause an assassin to fall. Blood splattered everywhere, and miserable cries rang out one after another. The red-clothed girl stopped and tilted her head to look at the scene below. After an hour, the killing finally stopped. All the assassins had fallen, and not a single one was left alive. A handsome man stood in the middle of the field. His red robes were dazzling. The moment Ning Shuamore saw the man's face, her heart raced. Shuer Ilan. This guy was actually Shuer Ilan. Why is this bastard here? Although she knew that the other party couldn't see her, Ning Shuamore still subconsciously hid in the shadows. The red-clothed man was very handsome. After the dust settled, he raised his hand and flicked his robes. Chapter 634. He did not know what material his robe was made of. There was some blood splashed on it, but when he flicked it, it all fell off. The blood flew like rain, but there was not a speck of dust on his body. He smiled at the girl. His smile was alluring. "Are you okay?" The girl did not seem to recognize him. She tilted her head and looked at him. "Who are you?" The red-clothed man's eyes darkened. "You don't remember me?" The girl looked at him again. After a while, she said, "You seem familiar. 10 years ago, I said that I would become stronger. I would stand by your side and protect you." The red-clothed man looked disappointed, but his tone was still calm. His tone was gentle and had a faint scholarly air. The girl paused for a moment. She seemed to finally remember. "You are the little white snake with a bump on its head. You finally remember." The red-clothed man smiled. His smile was like a flower blooming. It was bright and beautiful in the spring. "It's me. Can I stand by your side now?" The girl tilted her head and looked at him. She also smiled. "I didn't misjudge you back then." She seemed to be emotional. "After 10 years, you have grown up and become stronger." The red-clothed man did not say anything. He only looked at her as if he was looking at the only salvation in his bleak life. The girl looked at him again. "What's your name?" The red-clothed man's expression darkened. "I don't have a name. My brothers used to call me Old Six. In the Demon Palace's secret guard training ground, they called me Number 6. The girl did not say anything for a moment. She raised her head and looked at the moon in the sky. Then, she looked at him who was standing quietly in the night. She seemed to have thought of something and smiled. "The night is waning. Your clothes are red like fire. I will give you a name. How about Shui Yi Lan?" The red-clothed man's eyes lit up. "Thank you for giving me a name. Then I will be Shui Ilan. Is it Shui from Bai Shui?" The girl seemed to be stunned. A secret guard appeared in the dark and shouted at the red-clothed man. "How dare you? Who do you think you are? How dare you have the same surname as the princess?" The red-clothed girl glanced at the secret guard. The secret guard seemed to be shocked. He bowed. "I have crossed the line." The girl only replied to him with one word. "Get lost." The shadow guard quietly retreated. The girl smiled at the red-clothed man. "You were originally a white snake. Snow is also your true color. Let's call you Shui Ilan." "Thank you, princess." Shui Ilan bowed. His every movement was filled with poetic elegance. "Then can Shui Ilan follow the princess?" The young girl stretched and stood up. "All right, you can be the leader of the guards by this seat's side." It turned out that the name Shui Ilan was given to him by this princess. Ning Shuamore looked at the two people standing above her. Suddenly, she felt somewhat perplexed. When did this happen? Why would she see this? Could this be a dream? But why was the main character in her dream someone else? While she was lost in thought, a pair of cold eyes suddenly looked in her direction. Who's there? Ning Xuemore subconsciously raised her head. Her eyes met with Shui Ilan's eyes. She was shocked. He could see her. How could it be? Wasn't she always a passerby in this scene? A red shadow flashed and a pale golden light shot towards Ning Xuemore. Chapter 635. Ning Xuemore was shocked. Just as she was about to dodge, a strong gust of wind suddenly rose around her. Fog filled the sky and covered everything. There was a sorrowful atmosphere around her. In the thick fog, there was the sound of a zither. A woman was singing, "The sun rises in the east, my red dress is like fire. The spring flowers are bright, the night is waning. Dancing gracefully, my heart is filled with sorrow. The past is hard to recall, the zither is hard to reconcile." The song was so sorrowful that it almost made people cry. Ning Xuemore also felt sad in her heart. Suddenly, her vision blurred. The thick fog disappeared, and so did the beauty in red. At this moment, Ning Xuemore's mind suddenly became hazy. The scenery she saw just now seemed to have disappeared along with the fog. There was nothing left. She looked around blankly and realized that she was in a cave. The cave was not small. The walls of the cave were made of white crystal stones. They were clear and sparkling, shining with a faint white light in the dark night. There was a crystal bed in the cave. Although it was called a crystal bed, it was actually a big bed-shaped white crystal stone. On the crystal bed, a man in red sat quietly. Ning Xuemore suddenly took a step back. Shui Ilan. This man was none other than Shui Ilan. If his appearance in her dream was still a little immature, then at this moment, he was the one Ning Xuemore was used to seeing. He seemed to be seriously injured. There were faint bloodstains on the corner of his pale lips. His face was unusually pale. He seemed to be meditating, but also seemed to be in a nightmare. His long eyelashes were drooping, slightly trembling like the wings of a butterfly. Ning Xuemore looked at his tightly knitted eyebrows and trembling lips. She finally came to a conclusion. This bastard was in a nightmare. And his injuries were not light. This was a good opportunity given by God to get rid of him. She subconsciously wanted to shoot some kind of hidden weapon like a poisonous needle. However, when she raised her hand to touch it, her palm passed through her body. It was so light that she did not touch anything. What was going on? She subconsciously looked down and realized that she did not have a body. She was shocked. What was going on? Out of habit, she reached out her hand to touch the crystal beside her, but she couldn't see where her palm was. She was shocked again as a thought flashed through her mind. Could it be that he was still a soul? She also finally vaguely remembered that because she wanted to heal her injuries, she had allowed Yu Tianlan to bring out her soul. She had unintentionally broken that barrier, and then, what was she doing here? What is this place? Was this a dream of her soul, or was it real? Ning Xuemore felt like she was in a mess. She looked at Shui Ilan again. His eyelashes were trembling even harder. It seemed like he was about to wake up. She couldn't be here. Right now, she was only a soul body. Even if Shui Ilan was heavily injured, she wouldn't be able to do anything to him. If this pervert were to discover her, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to protect her soul. She had to leave. She couldn't stay here any longer. She had to leave. Even if she went to Yi Qingwan's cave residence, it would be safer than staying here. She had just finished thinking about it when a gust of wind suddenly appeared in the cave. It directly swept her away and disappeared. Momo, Shui Ilan, who was sitting there quietly, suddenly called out softly and opened his eyes. The cave had been lonely and cold for 1,000 years. He was the only one in the huge cave. There was no one else. Shui Ilan sat there quietly for a moment. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. It was unknown whether it was a bitter smile or something else. Chapter 636. From the moment he opened his eyes in this world, Shui Ilan seemed to be alone. He could not remember the past, nor could he plan for the future. Fortunately, he He still remembered that he was Shwe Elan, and that he had a blackwave zither by his side. After he woke up from the crystal coffin, he kept having a recurring dream. In the dream, there were swords and sabers, but when he woke up, he could not remember anything. He could only vaguely remember that song that made him feel sad every time he sang it. In the dream, he had forgotten everything except for the melody and lyrics of the song. He could even remember every word. Later, when he sang it himself, he slightly changed a few words, making him feel that the lyrics finally fit his mood. The past that he could not remember made him crazy. He faintly felt that this dream should be related to the things that happened before he was sealed, but he had forgotten everything as soon as he woke up. Damn it! He cursed under his breath and slowly stood up from the crystal bed. His blood was boiling in his chest, making him almost spit out blood again. He clenched his fist. His eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. He thought that he would not meet any opponents in this world, but he did not expect that there would be Han Shan Yu. That bastard's martial arts were obviously higher than his. Previously, he had almost destroyed his zither in the palace, causing him to be injured and have no choice but to hide. He did not think that he would meet him again. Using the forbidden technique continuously had caused him to be heavily injured, and in the carriage he was hit by Han Shanyu's palm, causing him to be even more injured. Han Shanyu had indeed kept his promise and let him go, but he did not know where so many experts had come from to chase after him. No matter where he hid, he would meet people who were searching for him, and all of them were top expert. If he was not heavily injured, these people would not be his opponents, and he would not have to run, he could just kill them. But now, he could only flee like a rat crossing the street. For 3 days, he was exhausted from running for his life. Fortunately, in the end, he sensed that there was a sealed crystal cave several hundred feet above the ground. He used the earth escape technique to escape to this place. This place was extremely hidden. He hid here for a day, and as expected, no one came to find him. He could finally rest in peace for a day. He clenched his fist again, and his martial arts would completely recover. The moment he recovered, he would definitely take revenge on those who had chased after him. He would make those people beg for death. Han Shan Yu. Han Shan Yu. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. Let's wait and see. He stood there in a daze for a moment. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something and his expression changed slightly. He vaguely felt that there was something more in his dream than before. He tried his best to think. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He finally remembered a scene from his dream. At that time, he seemed to be standing beside someone and then saw that person. Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo appeared in his dream. How did she appear in his dream? Was it a coincidence? Or was there some kind of connection? Several questions rolled around in his mind. He subconsciously walked around the cave. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks. He raised his hand and grabbed at the air, then brought it to his nose and sniffed. Then, he slowly loosened his grip. Ning Xuemo. He really smelled the scent of Ning Xuemo's soul. She had really been here, and she was even in her soul form. Little Xuemo, did you miss me? Snow was the balcony, jade was the railing, bamboo was the courtyard, and plum blossoms were the gods. Ning Xuemo did not expect that she would come to a mountain in a daze. Among the green mountains and trees, there were vague balconies. All the balconies were snow-white, as if they were made of snow. Chapter 637. All the pavilions were snow-white, as if they were made of snow. The courtyards of the pavilions were planted with clumps of bamboo, making rustling sounds with the breeze. The courtyard Ning Xuemo appeared in had bamboo and plum blossoms. It was obviously not winter, but the plum blossoms were tender and beautiful, and the branches were covered with dark red dots. Ning Xuemo looked at the dark green bamboo on the left and the plum blossoms on the right. The corners of her mouth faintly twitched. She didn't feel the elegance of the gentleman's words, but instead felt a little demonic. Although plum blossoms and bamboo belonged to the 4 gentlemen, they shouldn't be in the same season. This was the first time she saw plum blossoms and bamboo complementing each other. Moreover, her sharp eyes saw a few wild chrysanthemums swaying in the corner of the courtyard. This courtyard had 3 of the 4 gentlemen, and only the orchid was left. Speaking of which, whose house had such a tasteful courtyard? How did she come here? Ning Xuemore stood in the courtyard and pondered for a moment. She was wondering if she should go in and take a look. The door of the main hall opened, and two women walked out. The two women were dressed similarly. Both of them wore white dresses with cloud patterns on them. Ning Xuemore's heart sank slightly. She was not unfamiliar with this pattern. She had seen it twice in the Heavenly Book Mountains, and both times were unpleasant. Bright Reverence Cult. They were the disciples of Bright Reverence Cult. Ning Xuemore's gaze fell on the plaque on the main hall's door. The white cloud pattern wrapped around three large words, Qingwan Hall. Ning Xuemore's body couldn't help but retreat a jong. She couldn't have really broken into the lair of Bright Reverence Cult, right? This was the residence of Bright Reverence Cult's leader, Yi Qingwan. Ning Xuemore had heard of this leader for a long time. She was the only female disciple of the ancestor, and was famous for being protective of her disciples. Her disciples could almost do whatever they wanted in this continent. Damn, she was just thinking about it when she was at Shuerilan's place, and that strange wind really brought her here. She and this Bright Reverence religion were obviously not on good terms. She had been schemed against by the disciples of Bright Reverence religion twice and had almost lost her life. Although she had survived in the end, she had unknowingly formed a grudge with this Bright Reverence religion. She and Yi Qingwan could be considered enemies. Yi Qingwan's magic was amazing. She could use magic to disperse people's souls. If she found out that she had broken in by mistake, she would not have a good time. Right now, she was far from being a match for this person. It was better for her to take advantage of the fact that no one noticed and flee far away. Just as she was about to turn around, her body suddenly tightened, as if she was suddenly caught by something. She was shocked. Looking around, she found herself trapped in a pale white net. Master. The two women who had just come out knelt in the direction of the palace door. Ning Xuemore also raised her head when she heard the voice. Her heart skipped a beat. A woman in a white robe stood at the entrance of the hall. Her long hair was tied up with a white jade hairpin. She had light red lips and a tall nose. Her facial features were beautiful. Coupled with her white robe, she gave off a kind of otherworldly beauty. This made Ning Xuemore instantly think of the ancient tomb sect's Xiaolongnu. However, looking at her slanted eyebrows and the corners of her eyes, when she looked at people, she gave off a feeling of power without being angry. She looked somewhat cold. This also made Ning Xuemore think of Li Morcho, who had killed countless people because of love. She didn't know why, but when Ning Xuemore looked at her face, she faintly felt that she was familiar. However, she couldn't remember where she had seen her before. Looking at the woman's appearance, she seemed to be a 22 or 23-year-old girl. However, the cold and solemn temperament around her gave people a feeling of vicissitudes. There was no need to ask, she was Yi Qingwan. Chapter 638. Yi Qingwan raised her white fingers slightly, and a pale white light flickered from her fingertips, weaving into a net. In the net was Ning Xuemore's soul. Ning Xuemore's mind raced. She and Yi Qingwan had never met before, so she shouldn't know her. She opened her eyes wide, looked at Yi Qingwan in horror, and said in a trembling voice, "You, why did you catch me? Please let me go." Yi Qingwan's gaze swept over her. "Where did you come from?" Her voice was cold and magnetic, very pleasant to the ears. She really didn't know her. Ning Xuemore trembled even more fiercely, her face at a loss. I'm called Ahua. I'm not a brat. I was sleeping at home, but I don't know how I ended up here. Immortal lady, please spare me. Immortal lady, please spare me." Yi Qingwan's two disciples could obviously see her, and their faces showed joy. They looked at Yi Qingwan and said, "Master, perhaps, we don't need to catch other souls." Yi Qingwan nodded slightly. "You can leave. Look after shark men, don't let it commit suicide." "Yes, Master. Master has told us that shark men has to be starved for a few days to make its blood pure. It also needs to be energetic and calm so that its skin will be good. We didn't treat it badly, and we even changed it into a bigger water tank." One of the disciples was eloquent and recited the taboo of raising sharkmen like it was a book. Yi Qinghuan nodded slightly. It's good that you remember. When it recovers, we can take its skin tomorrow. You won't serve it anymore. Yes, master. The two women agreed in unison and left together. Teach people? She didn't expect that there was really a sharkman in this world. Because Ning Xuemore left the ship early, she didn't know that Yi Feng was that sharkman, so this thought only flashed in her mind, and she threw it aside. She was more concerned about why Yi Qinghuan caught her. It seemed that she wanted to catch some soul, and then she came to her door. Why did you catch me? Boo-hoo, I want to go home. Ning Xuemore's body trembled even more violently like an ordinary girl. But in his heart, he was thinking of a way to escape. Even if Yi Qinghuan did not know him, it was definitely not a good thing to fall into her hand. Ning Xuemore tried to use telepathy to contact Kirin, wanting it to report to Rongyue Tianlan. Han Shanyue's whereabouts were unknown. Now, it was estimated that only Rongyue Tianlan had the power to save her from the fire pit. However, she didn't know if it was because she was too far away or if her telepathy had failed. She called out to Kirin in her heart several times, but there was no response. Don't be afraid. Yi Qinghuan retracted her fingers and Ning Xuemore was caught in the net. Yi Qinghuan's voice sounded faintly, I won't take your life. On the contrary, I want you to live well. She turned around and walked into the hall. Ning Xuemore was wrapped in the net, trembling as she followed behind her. Chapter 639. Why don't you enter its body and live in its place? Yi Qinghuan's gaze turned to Ning Xuemore, as if she was gently negotiating with her. I don't want to turn into a cat. Ning Xuemore immediately opened her mouth. She was cursing in her heart. Her transmigration was too much. First, she transmigrated into a little girl's body, and now she actually wanted her to turn into a cat. Yi Qinghuan's expression turned cold. It's your fortune to be able to possess its body. It's not an ordinary cat. I don't want to be an ordinary cat either. I still want to be a human. Ning Xuemore interrupted her. She was calculating in her heart. No matter what, this woman was the ancestor's disciple, and the ancestor was the guardian of this continent. His disciple should also be cultivating the way of immortality. Even if she was bad, she couldn't be that bad. Just like that Abbess Mihu in the TV series, no matter how vicious she was still a righteous person. She wouldn't kill the innocent. For example, the several bright reverence religion disciples she had encountered, each and every one of them was filled with righteousness. When they wanted to snatch her things or kill her, they had to find a dignified excuse. If she didn't want to die, Yi Qinghuan might let her go. Fairy, this cat is obviously not an ordinary cat. I think it's better to let a cat possess its body. If we put a human soul in it, I'm afraid it will change its genes. Yi Qinghuan's expression was originally somewhat impatient, but when she heard the last sentence, her eyebrows slightly raised. Genes? It's the characteristics of cats. Humans have human characteristics, and cats have cat characteristics. This can't be confused. Ning Xuemore tried to reason with her. Yi Qinghuan smiled coldly. All living beings in the 6 realms are just mutual transformations. What's the point of talking about human characteristics and cat characteristics? Today, you have to be willing even if you don't want to. She no longer talked nonsense with Ning Xuemore. She stretched out her snow-white hand, and the dying cat fell into her palm. She raised her hand and gently stroked the cat's head. Your mission has come to an end. You can come out now. Her hand turned into a claw, and a faint white light shot into the cat's head. The cat's forepaws kicked, and it let out a mournful moan before it stopped moving. A wisp of grey mist emerged from the top of the cat's head. It swayed slightly in the air and gradually condensed into the shape of an old woman. Ning Xuemore's heart sank. She didn't expect the cat spirit to be a human soul. This soul looked too old, at least 80 years old. It swayed back and forth, almost unable to stabilize its form. Yi Qinghuan flicked her finger at the pale grey soul. Reincarnate. The pale grey soul let out a muffled cry and dissipated in the air. Yi Qinghuan's gaze turned to Ning Xuemore. She whispered, "I hope you can hold on a little longer." His wrist buckled downwards. Ning Xuemore couldn't help but fall down. Everything in front of her turned black, and the heavy feeling of having her soul enter her body instantly filled all her senses. She jumped up, but after all, she had just used this cat body, so she wasn't used to it. As soon as she jumped up, she fell down. Yi Qinghuan's lips curled up, revealing a rare smile. She raised her hand and gently picked her up. She stroked her fur and murmured, "Little White, I knew you wouldn't leave me. You will stay with me forever, until he accepts me again." When she said the last sentence, there was a hint of bitterness in her voice. Ning Xuemore's hair almost stood up when she was stroked by her. Chapter 640. The cat's body was like a cage, imprisoning her soul inside. She tried several methods, but none of them worked. Damn it! What a perverted woman. The cat's original soul should have died a long time ago. This woman was only trying her best to keep the cat's body. Who knew how many of its cores had been changed? She didn't want to turn into a cat. She would control this body to commit suicide later. Once the cat died, she would be able to escape. Yi Qinghuan seemed to have sensed her thoughts, or perhaps all the previous spirits of this cat had the same idea. She said coldly, "Don't try anything funny. I have set a forbidden spell on this cat. Unless I use a special method to get you out, you won't be able to escape. Once you try to die, your soul will be destroyed." Ning Xuemore's body stiffened, and she stared at her with her cat eyes. She started to think about how to deal with this woman. Ning Xuemore was the kind of person who wouldn't offend others unless they offended her. If they offended her, she would pay them back 3 times. She didn't have much hostility towards Yi Qinghuan, and she didn't want to deal with her. Now that this woman had offended her, she had to be prepared for her revenge. Yi Qinghuan had a faint floral fragrance on her body, and it didn't smell bad. Ning Xuemore knew that it was useless to try anything now, so she lowered her head as if she had accepted her fate. Yi Qinghuan looked at her strangely, as if she didn't expect her to accept her fate so quickly. When other people entered the cat's body, they had to struggle for a few days. They had to go on a hunger strike, bang their heads against the wall, and all kinds of suicidal activities. Of course, she was prepared for all of them. Those people's struggles were useless in her hands. They didn't do anything except suffer more. This time, the spirit she sent to her door was very obedient. Yi Qinghuan was a little happy. She raised her hand and stroked the fur on its back. "Good girl. I will bring you around to familiarize you with the environment. After all, you will be living here for more than 10 years. She carried Ning Xuemore out. More than 10 years. How could a spirit become so old in more than 10 years? That spirit was definitely not an old person when it was first caught. It was most likely a young girl. It seemed that living in this cat's body made the spirit grow old very quickly. Similar to a cat's lifespan, the Bright Reverence cult's territory was not small, and there were also many disciples. Yi Qinghuan carried it and wandered around. From time to time, they would bump into other disciples. These disciples not only bowed respectfully to Yi Qinghuan, but also to the cat in her arms. "Little White, did you see that? As long as you stay here obediently, you will be very happy and very powerful." Yi Qinghuan whispered as she stroked the cat's fur. "Damn it, why don't you transform into a cat if you're comfortable?" Big sister doesn't care for this kind of bluffing. Ning Xuemore sneered in her heart. She turned her eyes and observed the terrain, preparing for her escape in the future. "Let's go. I'll show you some more good stuff." Yi Qinghuan carried it and walked to a wall. Her finger drew on the wall for a moment, as if she had opened some kind of mechanism. The snow-white wall slowly split open and turned into a moon cave door. Walking through the moon cave door, they saw a bamboo forest. There was a winding stone path that led to the depths of the bamboo forest. The road was paved with multicolored stones. Each stone had its own pattern. Yi Qinghuan's steps were like moving clouds and flowing water, but Ning Xuemore could see that the stones she stepped on were all traceable. Chapter 641. Ning Xuemore scanned the surroundings again and smiled in her heart. It seemed that there were some good things hidden here. There was a chain of mechanisms. She observed silently. The mechanisms here were quite complicated, one after another. Yi Qinghuan walked very carefully, as if she was afraid of taking a wrong step. Ning Xuemore's lips curled up slightly. The mechanisms here might be a life and death situation for others, but for her, who was an expert in mechanisms, it was just child's play. She could break it with a raise of her hand. In the deepest part of the bamboo forest was a large hall. Pushing open the door, Ning Xuemore was slightly stunned. She thought that this would be a treasure trove, and the hall would be filled with dazzling jewels. She did not expect that the hall would be so empty, and there were only a few things inside, and they were all unremarkable. There was a treasure shelf in the hall, and on the shelf, there were not any treasures, but some ordinary things. A brush holder, 2 writing brushes, a jade bowl, an old brocade handkerchief, these were all common things. What was even more strange was that there were 2 praying mats on the shelf. Ning Xuemore stared at the praying mat for a while, and found that it looked familiar. She thought for a while and finally remembered. The shape and color of this praying mat was similar to the praying mat that Han Shanyu had casually created. Her eyes swept around the hall, but she didn't find anything that was truly valuable. The most valuable thing was probably the white jade bowl. The quality of the jade was not bad, and it was thin and sparkling. If it was stolen, it could be sold for a few thousand taels of silver. But a few thousand taels of silver was nothing to Ning Xuemore now, so she was even less interested in these things. What she was interested in was Yi Qinghuan. She kept so many ordinary things here as if they were her own treasures. Could it be that these things had some special significance? The whole world knew that she liked her master, and these things, could it be that she had secretly collected the venerable emperor's items? Little White, be good here and don't move. I know you understand. If you dare to destroy anything inside, I will pull out your soul and let you taste all kinds of torture. Yi Qinghuan put the cat in her arms on the ground and coldly threatened. Ning Xuemore stretched herself on the ground and then lay down. Of course, she wouldn't move recklessly at this moment, but it wouldn't be too late to do so in the future. Yi Qinghuan naturally didn't know what she was thinking. Seeing that it was really obedient, she was satisfied and nodded slightly to it. That's a good girl. She turned around and walked to the treasure shelf. She took out a snow-white handkerchief from her bosom and carefully wiped the items placed on the shelf one by one. Every time she wiped an item, she would explain the origins of the item. For example, the brush holder was a birthday gift from her master. As for the 2 brushes, one belonged to her, and the other belonged to her master. That handkerchief was also the one that her master had used to wipe her sweat. That bowl was even more special. It was personally made by her master. Every item seemed to have a sense of warmth when a master and disciple interacted with each other. Ning Xuemore lay there and looked at Yi Qinghuan with a complicated expression. This Yi Qinghuan was really infatuated. She loved her master so much that she went crazy, right? It was simply a kind of bigotry. She didn't know what kind of feelings her master had for Yi Qinghuan at that time. Had he never fallen in love with her? Chapter 642. Or was it because the master had fallen in love with her, but as time passed, his feelings faded? That person didn't seem to care about what others said, so it shouldn't be because gossip was a fearful thing. Ning Xuemore had also read some novels and movies about love between master and disciple in her previous life. It was nothing more than the master being cold and the disciple secretly falling in love with the master. At first, it was all kinds of sweetness, but once it was clear, it was all kinds of hurt. The disciple was hurt again and again, and the master was hurt again and again. Then, for the sake of the world, they continued to hurt each other again and again, until they were hurt so badly that they were hovering between life and death. The best example was the male master and female disciple in Snowflake Sword. It was a combination of all kinds of love stories. The master was noble and cold, and he took in a little girl as his disciple. The disciple was so cute, and she gradually fell in love with the master. She didn't dare to say or let others know, but she secretly collected the master's things and did everything for the master. And the master was all kinds of arrogant, and often, a careless action would hurt the disciple. In fact, the master also fell in love with the female disciple, but because of her identity, he naturally couldn't show it. So, there were all kinds of hidden injuries. In the end, the disciple was forced to become a demon by the master, and a demon would bring disaster to the world. For the sake of the world's peace, the master endured the pain and killed his female disciple. In the end, the female disciple died in his arms. It was the ultimate torture, and it made people cry bitter tears. In the future, many novels about love between master and disciple were created based on this movie, so naturally, there were all kinds of torture. After Ning Xuemore watched a few movies, she began to have a shadow of love between master and disciple, because there was only one word for love between master and disciple: torture. Now, she saw it with her own eyes from Yi Qingwan. It was strange, when she read novels or movies about love between master and disciple, she sympathized with the female disciple, but for some reason, she didn't sympathize with Yi Qingwan. If Yi Qingwan was in love with the master, then this love was meaningless. If she was abandoned by the master, then it was even more meaningless. Why would a scumbag love her? It was hard to find a two-legged toad in this world, but there were plenty of two-legged men. Why did she have to hang herself on a tree? Why did he have to make himself miserable and miserable? Why did he have to do this? Moreover, this woman became a pervert because she liked her master, and Abbess Mihu was repulsive. Yi Qingwan was full of worries and had no one to talk to. The only person she could talk to was this cat. This cat couldn't speak and wouldn't spread her secrets around, but it could understand human language. It was simply the best emotional trash poke. She could tell it what was on her mind. Ning Xuemore naturally understood the role she was playing now. Yi Qingwan was sometimes sad, sometimes happy, and sometimes sad. That was her own story. When Ning Xuemore listened to this, it was like listening to a lullaby. She felt a little drowsy. Yi Qingwan felt that her words were full of passion, but in Ning Xuemore's ears, she felt that it was very normal. This was because from the beginning to the end, she didn't hear any truly passionate scenes, such as kissing or going to bed. At most, it was a little ambiguous. However, the most taboo when listening to a story was to listen to only one side of the story, because that side would exaggerate the things that were most beneficial to her. Therefore, the authenticity of some things had to be greatly discounted. However, Di Zun actually treated his only female disciple differently, didn't he? Chapter 643. For example, after Yi Qingwan, he didn't accept any female disciples. For example, this disciple was too arrogant on this continent, but the overlord didn't have the intention to interfere. Ning Xuemore used her claws to draw circles on the ground unconsciously. She secretly rejoiced that she didn't fall in love with the overlord and didn't agree to be his disciple. Otherwise, years later, Yi Qingwan's current appearance would be her role model. However, her character was different from Yi Qingwan's. Yi Qingwan was very stubborn in this relationship. But she, Ning Xuemore, would definitely not do that. Even if it was a one-sided love, if one of them chose to let go, she would definitely not pester him. She would let go faster and more decisively than him. Life was so short, and there were so many things to do. Why did she have to let feelings tie her down and make herself like a resentful woman? In fact, there weren't many things in this hall. Yi Qingwan wiped them one by one, and it only took half an hour to finish. Ning Xuemore listened to her nagging for half an hour, and almost didn't move during the whole process. This made Yi Qingwan even more satisfied. She picked up the cat again. You're the most obedient. When other souls occupied the cat's body, when she brought it to tell stories, those souls were not obedient. They controlled the cat's body and always wanted to destroy it. Of course, those souls couldn't do anything under her eyes. They just needed to suffer a little more to learn to be obedient, because Ning Xuemore's obedience made Yi Qingwan very happy. She walked out with the cat in her arms. Good little white, since you're so obedient, I'll take you to see Sharkmen again. If you're more obedient, I'll reward you with some fish when we kill that Sharkmen tomorrow. Sharkmen? It's good to see it. Ning Xuemore was a little more spirited. The place where Sharkmen was imprisoned was not far from the secret hall. After leaving the enchantment, They took a few turns to the left and arrived. It was also in a courtyard, and there was a pond in the courtyard. The pond water was clear and deep, and there was a column in the middle of the pond. A dark blue figure was tied to the pillar. This should be the legendary Sharkmen. Ning Xuemore looked at the Sharkmen and her eyes widened in surprise. Sharkmen. She finally saw the real Sharkmen. The Sharkman's upper body was similar to a human's. His head, neck, shoulders, arms, and hands were all human-like. However, his wrists and other joints were covered with sparkling dark blue scales. Its body was slender, and below its chest was a streamlined fish body. Its long hair was spread over its body like seaweed. Half of its body was above the water, and the other half was underwater. From Ning Xuemore's position, she couldn't see its full appearance clearly. Even so, he was still amazed by it. A mermaid. This was a true mermaid. Looking at her slim figure, it was hard to imagine how devastatingly beautiful her face was. She looked at its face again. It lowered its head, and its face was hidden in its long hair. Even close up, it was still hazy. There were 2 bright reverence religion disciples guarding this place. When they saw Yi Qingwan arrive, they came over to salute her. They didn't forget to greet Ning Xuemore the cat. Yi Qingwan's gaze fell on the Sharkman's body. She looked at it from head to toe, and then lightly said, "It still won't say a word." The 2 bright reverence religion disciples nodded, reporting to Master, "It has never opened its mouth. Is it because Sharkmen can't speak?" Chapter 644. Yi Qingwan didn't say anything else. She walked leisurely around the pool, then suddenly opened her mouth and spat out 3 words. Yang Ziyuan, Sharkmen, who had been in meditation with his head lowered, suddenly trembled slightly. He slowly raised his head, and his seaweed-like long hair scattered to the sides like flowing water, revealing a beautiful face. His facial features were deep, his eyes were as blue as the sea, and his gaze was as sharp as a sword. He glanced at Yi Qingwan. Ning Xuemore's heart skipped a beat. Yang Ziyuan was her friend. When she suddenly heard her friend's name come out from Yi Qingwan's mouth, she was already a little surprised. She didn't understand how her friend was related to this Sharkman. Now that she saw the Sharkman's true face, her heart sank. This Sharkman's face actually faintly resembled Yi Feng's. Could it be that the taciturn shadow guard by Yang Ziyuan's side, Yi Feng, was Sharkmen? Ning Xuemore's cat eyes stared at the Sharkmen in deep thought. The Sharkmen seemed to have noticed Ning Xuemore's gaze, and actually also looked at her. The cat and shark's gazes met in the air. A glimmer of light flashed through the Sharkman's eyes, and then he lowered his eyes and lowered his head. Yi Qingwan's lips curved slightly, as if she was smiling. "You really do have thoughts about that little girl. Do you want to see her?" The Sharkman's head lowered even more, and he didn't respond. "As long as you open your mouth and say a few words, this lord can let you see her." The Sharkman still didn't speak, as if he didn't hear her words. Ning Xuemore was a little puzzled. Why did Yi Qingwan have to force the Sharkmen to speak? Could it be that she had a motive? Yi Qingwan asked a few more questions, and even threatened the Sharkmen with Yang Ziyuan's life, wanting to force the Sharkmen to speak. However, the Sharkmen seemed to have steeled his heart and didn't respond no matter what. It didn't even have any reaction. Yi Qingwan's 2 disciples were finally a little uncertain. "Master, perhaps it really can't speak. We haven't heard it speak even once in the past 3 days." The 2 disciples talked back and forth, and Yi Qingwan seemed to be a little uncertain. He looked at Sharkmen again and said warmly, "I've often heard people say that Sharkmen are good at singing. If you sing a song for me and sing well, I might let you go back to your hometown." Sharkmen still had no reaction. Yi Qingwan's face turned cold and she glanced at her disciple. That disciple understood and immediately said, "You Sharkmen, don't fail to appreciate kindness. Our sect master is merciful and kind. That day in the chaotic river, she saved your life and even spent countless spirit herbs to treat your injuries. Now, she only wants you to sing a song and you still won't do it. Are you Sharkmen also heartless?" The other disciple also said, "Just sing a song, even if it's just a short part." If it's pleasing to the sect master's ears, she will let you go and let you go back to the mermaid clan, okay? The two disciples were very good with words. They threatened, enticed, moved with emotion, and reasoned with reason. They used all kinds of tricks, but the mermaid turned a deaf ear to them and did not give them any reaction. Ning Xuemore also kept looking at that sharkman. Now, she believed that this sharkman was Yifeng. This sharkman's style was the same as Yifeng's. They were tolerant, silent, and had their own opinions. They wouldn't be easily swayed by the words of others. Xuemore now vaguely understood Yi Qinghuan's purpose. She was just teasing this sharkman to talk so that it would tell her the location of the sharkman's family so that it would be easier to capture more. Yifeng should be clear about Yi Qinghuan's thoughts, so he had been acting dumb and didn't say a word. Chapter 645. In the end, Yi Qinghuan didn't know its real identity and couldn't do anything to it. Yi Qinghuan stood there for a long time and didn't get what she wanted. Finally, she gave up and said, "You're on your own." Then, she picked up the cat and left. Yi Qinghuan took Ning Xuemore to a few places to let her familiarize herself with the layout of this place. Seeing that it was very obedient, she was relieved. After returning to her own main hall, she stroked the cat's head and said, "I'm going to meditate. You go play by yourself. Remember, don't try to escape. Even if there are 10 of you, you won't be able to escape from my palm." The cat nodded and even used its head to rub against her body, looking very obedient. Yi Qinghuan smiled with satisfaction. It was just an ordinary little soul. In her sect where experts were everywhere, what kind of tricks could it play? She raised her hand and stroked its back fur. Go. Then, she went to meditate. Ning Xuemore turned around and ran out. This cat's status in this sect was obviously not low. In the process of Ning Xuemore strolling around, she met several groups of disciples. Even if Yi Qinghuan wasn't in front of her, these people still greeted her. Ning Xuemore strolled leisurely, as if she was admiring the scenery. The others were obviously used to this cat. As long as it didn't leave the Bright Reverence School's territory, they wouldn't care about it. Ning Xuemore strolled to the place where Sharkmen was imprisoned. The two disciples were still guarding there. They were bored here all the time. When they saw Ning Xuemore arrive, they were happy and called her over to talk to her to relieve their boredom. Ning Xuemore was now a cat. She didn't need to talk. She only needed to proudly allow them to stroke her fur, which made them very happy. This cat was born good-looking. With long snow-white fur, when it ran, it looked like a rolling snowball. It was very lively and cute. Most of the girls liked this kind of small animal. Ning Xuemore's cute appearance made them even happier, so they let her wander around. Ning Xuemore? A deep, magnetic voice sounded in Ning Xuemore's heart. Ning Xuemore looked at the pool with her cat eyes. Sharkmen in the pool did not react, but Ning Xuemore knew clearly that the sound came from sharkmen. This was not a sound transmission technique, but a sound wave that only animals could hear. Ning Xuemore looked at the two Bright Reverence Religion disciples and saw that they didn't have any reaction. Yifeng. Ning Xuemore also tried to meow. The meow that came out of her mouth was the standard cat language. It was a very delicate meow. It couldn't be helped. A cat's voice was just like that. She couldn't make human sounds. The sharkmen in the pool, however, understood. "It really is you. Why are you here?" Ning Xuemore wanted to smile bitterly. Her experience was too bizarre. She was afraid that she couldn't explain it clearly in a few words. She didn't answer Yifeng's question. She was also very curious about Yifeng's experience when he fell into Yi Qinghuan's hands. But now was obviously not the time to ask about this. Therefore, she opened her mouth and asked the most important question. "Yi Qinghuan wants your skin and flesh. Do you have a way to escape?" Yifeng's tone was slightly sad. "She used cold iron chains to lock my shoulder blades. If I can't untie the cold iron chains, I can't escape." Ning Xuemore jumped into the pool and stared at the cold iron chains for a moment. Then, she opened her mouth again. What if I have a way to untie your cold iron chains? There are many experts here and the security is tight. Can you escape? Yes. As long as my body is free, I can use the water escape technique in the water, Yi Feng said confidently. Chapter 646. Wherever there is water, it's my escape route. Yi Feng added. So that's how it is. Ning Xuemore paused, then, can you take me with you when you escape? I'm a cat now, I can't breathe in the water. Yes. I can hold you and set up a protective bubble. That way, you won't suffocate in the water. You just need to come out of the water every half an hour to replenish your gas. Yi Feng answered straightforwardly. Ning Xuemore's eyes lit up. That's great. She could escape with Yi Feng. As long as she had a way to escape, she could go all out. She would make Yi Qingwan pay the price. With Ning Xuemore's current martial arts, she didn't have the ability to beat Yi Qingwan up. However, she could make that woman's heart ache for once. It would be best if she vomited blood. She seemed to have seen Yi Qingwan fuming with anger, wishing she was dead. She was like a cat, lying on the edge of the pool, squinting her eyes into a semicircle. She happily reached an agreement with Yi Feng. Then it's a deal. I'll help you get rid of the cold iron chains, and you take me away. Okay. Yi Feng's voice was also a little excited. He was already prepared to die, but now that there was hope in front of him, he still wanted to take a gamble. But the cold iron chains are complicated, and you need a key. The key is with Yi Qingwan. Yi Feng had also studied the cold iron chains that trapped him in the past few days. He needed a key, and he needed help from outside. He couldn't open it himself. Ning Xuemore said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of the key. Wait for me for a while. I'll be back in a while." She turned and ran. Actually, when Yi Qingwan carried her here, she had already noticed the cold iron chains, and naturally, she also noticed the key in Yi Qingwan's sleeve. So when she was rubbing against Yi Qingwan, she reached out her claws and quietly stole the key. Because a cat's body was not easy to carry, even if she used her claws to carry it, it would be easily discovered. Therefore, as soon as she left Yi Qingwan's courtyard, she hid the key somewhere. He could just use it now. Yi Feng watched it run away like a wisp of smoke and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Although he only had a short contact with Ning Xuemore, he knew her character very well. He knew that with her ability, she would definitely be able to get the key. This time, he really had hope of escaping. His gaze then turned to the two female disciples. Later, he would have to think of a way to lure the two maids away so that it would be easier for him to carry out his plan. The two female disciples were completely unaware that Ning Xuemore and Yi Feng had already formulated an escape plan at this moment. They were still chatting idly, discussing a piece of gossip they had just heard. Daliang's governor was overjoyed to hear that his daughter would be getting married in half a month. He had already sent out invitations and invited guests to attend the ceremony. One of the distant relatives of the two disciples was among the invited guests. Girls loved to gossip. While they were chatting happily, a voice suddenly sounded behind them. The daughter of Daliang's city lord? Yang Ziyuan. She's getting married. With who? The voice was low and magnetic, with a slight tremor, but it was very pleasant to the ears. The two disciples suddenly turned their heads and stared at sharkmen in the pool in disbelief. You can talk. Yi Feng's dark blue eyes seemed to be shining. Answer me, who is she getting married to? Chapter 647. One of the disciples knew the details and subconsciously replied, I heard that it was her zither master, called something Jiu Zian. Yi Feng slightly closed his eyes and slowly clenched his fists. Was she going to marry that man? That man was clearly not worthy of her. The two female disciples looked at each other. Sharkmen finally spoke. Should they quickly report this good news to their master? One of the disciples said, You stay here and watch. She turned around and ran. You stop, I have a message for your master. Yi Feng suddenly spoke again. That disciple, who was about to run, stopped. He turned around and looked at Yifeng. What message do you have for our master? Actually, master will definitely come later. It's the same if you tell her face to face. Her voice became softer and softer until she didn't know what to say. Yifeng's pair of eyes stared at the two disciples. The bottom of his eyes was like the azure ocean, slowly stirring up a whirlpool. The two disciples' minds exploded, and the expression they looked at him with turned into a daze. Yifeng's voice was slow and gentle. Come here, you two come here. The two disciples seemed to be bewitched and they couldn't help but walk forward. They gradually came to the edge of the pool. The pool was very deep. It was more than 10 meters deep. If they fell in, they would lose their lives. Fear appeared on the faces of the two men, but their minds seemed to be controlled. They could only watch helplessly as their feet stepped into the pool, and finally, with a splash, they fell into the pool. When Ning Xuemore ran back with the key in one hand, she saw the two disciples struggling in the water. They seemed to want to open their mouths and shout for help, but their minds seemed to be controlled. Their mouths opened and closed, but they couldn't shout. When they saw Ning Xuemore coming, their eyes showed a pleading look. They looked very pitiful. Ning Xuemore slowed down and looked at Yifeng. Yifeng lowered his eyes and said, "We have to escape. They must die." Ning Xuemore naturally understood in her heart that these two people had been guarding this place all along. Once she and Yifeng made any movements, they would not be able to hide it from their eyes and would immediately shout out. It was a life and death situation. At this time, there was no room for mercy and kindness. She took a deep breath and didn't look at the two people. Instead, she jumped into the water and swam towards Yifeng. She was good at opening and closing the lock. Although it wasn't that easy to open the lock with the cat claws, she had good control. After a while, the cold iron lock was opened by her. "Thank you." Yifeng's shoulder was bleeding profusely. He raised his hand and pressed 2 fingers on his shoulder to stop the bleeding. At this time, there seemed to be some chaotic movement outside. There were messy footsteps, people shouting, and people screaming. Yifeng's face changed. Could it be that Ning Xuemore's theft of the key was exposed so quickly? Ning Xuemore seemed to know what he was thinking. She immediately said, "Don't worry. They are going in another direction. No one can care about this place for now." Yifeng was also a clever person. When he saw Ning Xuemore's eyes, he knew that she must have done something. He finally breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't dare to be negligent. He hugged the wet cat beside him and made a hand seal. Chapter 649. These disciples who had lost their lives were all elite disciples of the sect who were proficient in water-type spells. Now, they had died here for no reason, and they were shot to death by their own trap. If this matter were to spread out, it would be the biggest joke in the world. However, she couldn't care less about these disciples at this time. Her mind was on the secret hall in the depths of the bamboo forest. Her painstaking collection. She was flustered and almost stepped on those traps several times. When she staggered around the bamboo forest and finally saw the full appearance of the main hall, her entire heart sank into the abyss. Thick smoke billowed from the hall, and flames soared into the sky. More than half of the hall had been burned down, and the remaining part was crackling in the fire. It looked like it was about to collapse. Yi Qinghuan's vision turned dark. She forced herself to calm down and tried her best to comfort herself. Don't worry, don't worry. Although her treasures were placed in the hall, she had set up a fireproof enchantment on the shelf where the treasures were placed. Even if the entire hall was burned to ashes, her precious treasures should be fine. As long as her precious treasures were fine, what was the big deal about burning down the hall? She could order people to build it again. At most, a large number of disciples who built this secret hall would be sacrificed. She immediately cast a water-type spell to summon rainwater. The heavy rain poured down on the hall. The heavy rain, like seawater pouring down, finally put out the fire. Yi Qinghuan didn't care about the remaining flames and rushed into the crumbling hall. Then, as if she was fixed in place, her face turned pale, and she couldn't move anymore. Her shelf of treasures had been burned to a few pieces of wood. Those praying mats, handkerchiefs, brush holders, writing brushes, jade bowls. Some of them were burned to ashes, some were burned to ashes, and none of them could be seen. Plop. Yi Qinghuan stared blankly and sat on the ground. Those things were her painstakingly collected. They were her mental support for all these years. They were the only thing she could comfort herself with, but now, they were all burned to ashes. Clean. Not even a small piece was left for her. Who was so vicious? Who knew that these things were her precious treasures? Who could destroy her enchantment and set off such a deadly fire? Her mind buzzed, and almost immediately, she thought of that cat. To be exact, he thought of Ning Xuemore who had taken over the cat's body. Could it be that in order to take revenge on her, that living soul had destroyed her most beloved? She had only brought the cat into this place before, and it had also talked about how important those things were to her. The others, even her most trusted disciples, didn't know of such a place. The disciples who built this secret palace were all killed by her, and even their souls were scattered. It was impossible for him to have leaked this secret. The only possibility was the cat. However, that was merely an ordinary living soul. Did it have the ability to break through these layers of mechanisms? Impossible, right? How could such a little girl have such an ability? She took a deep breath, then another. She jumped up from the ground and rushed out like a whirlwind. The other disciples of Bright Reverence cult were still guarding the courtyard's entrance, not daring to disperse. When Yi Qinghuan rushed out, everyone was shocked again. Their master, who had always been dressed neatly and would not have a single strand of hair out of place even when a fire was burning in the room, was now half covered in mud and his face was covered in soot. Chapter 650. Yi Qingluan appeared in front of the disciples like a madwoman with a head of messy hair. A few of them even thought that it was some kind of monster because of their blurred vision. They almost attacked it. Fortunately, Yi Qingluan pulled back her hair and revealed her face, allowing these people to recognize her. Although these people were shocked, they still knelt down in unison. Master. Yi Qingluan naturally saw the surprise in the disciples' eyes, but at this time, she couldn't care less and asked, "Where's Xiaobai?" The disciples all looked at each other. They hadn't seen that proud cat for a while. Finally, a disciple remembered, "Master, an hour ago, disciple saw His Highness Xiaobai go to the beast transformation pond." The beast transformation pond was where Sharkmen was being held. Yi Qingluan's face changed again, but she didn't speak, her figure flashing as she rushed directly towards the beast transformation pond. At the edge of the beast transformation pond, the water was still deep and the pillar was still there, but Sharkmen was nowhere to be seen. Two corpses floated in the pond, their bellies bulging and their faces blue. Obviously they had drowned. Yi Qingluan stood at the edge of the pond, her fingers clenched tightly. If it was said that she had some suspicions before, doubting whether Ning Xuemore, this little soul, had the heart to do such a thing but did not have the ability to do so, now that she saw everything before her eyes, she was 80 to 90% sure that it was Ning Xuemore's doing. That little bastard girl, besides her beautiful appearance, her other abilities were ordinary, but she had never expected her to have such means. She had misjudged. She had really misjudged her. And this time, she had paid a heavy price for her misjudgment. For so many years, no one had been able to make her suffer such a big loss. She had suffered such a big setback. When her anger reached its peak, she calmed down and immediately summoned the souls of the two disciples. From their mouths, she learned that her guess was not wrong. When the two disciples were on the verge of death, they did see the cat running over with the key in its claws, swimming directly towards Sharkmen and opening the chains for him. They didn't see what happened after that because they died, but what happened before was enough to prove that Sharkmen was indeed saved by the cat. Yi Qinghuan was so regretful that she wanted to vomit blood. She thought that Ning Xuemore was a well-behaved girl who was rarely obedient. She thought that Ning Xuemore was the least tiring girl. However, she didn't expect that everything was just an illusion. That girl was clearly a black-bellied ancestor. Her revenge was simply a direct hit to a person's weak spot. This kind of revenge was the most ruthless. That girl. That scoundrel. She was going to capture that scoundrel girl and crush her soul inch by inch. She was going to tear her apart bit by bit. She was going to make her beg for death. She quickly looked around and finally confirmed that the sharkmen and the cat had escaped through the water. She snorted coldly. Water escape technique? She knew how to do it too. Sharkman's wounds were still bleeding. She followed the trail of Sharkman's blood. She did not believe that a cat like Sharkman could escape from her pursuit. What's more, Sharkman's blood had a special fragrance that made it easy to track him down. With a flash of light, she disappeared from the pool as well. Yifeng carried Ning Shuamore and moved through the water like a barracuda. He walked through the underground river. The underground river was ever-changing and there were countless of them. Ning Shuamore was wrapped in a water bubble, so she couldn't see anything clearly. Chapter 651. The cat that Ning Shuamore possessed had an average aptitude, so it couldn't practice any martial arts. Otherwise, Yi Qingwan would have let it practice the art of immortality to accompany her since she loved this cat so much. She didn't need to change the soul inside it frequently to maintain its life. In such a dark underground, Ning Shuamore could only see about 30 to 40 feet away. Any further and everything would be a blur. But the scenery of 30 to 40 feet away was too much for her to take in. The experience of walking through the underground water vein was very wonderful. There were all kinds of strangely shaped rocks, underground caves, and stalactites. She was surrounded by a dazzling sight. Yifeng took her through the tunnel very fast, giving her the illusion that she was riding a high-speed train underground. The bubble that Yifeng set up around her was not too big. After walking for about half an hour underground, she felt a little suffocated. When she was in her original form, she could hold her breath for a long time. But now, this cat was an ordinary cat, so she couldn't really regulate her breath. Yifeng didn't seem to expect her cat body to be so weak. Seeing that her expression was not right, he immediately went up. He should have gone deep underground, and it took him a lot of effort to follow the water vein. When he came out of the water with the cat, Ning Shuamore's cat face was about to turn blue. Yifeng broke the bubble, and Ning Shuamore immediately lay on the water surface to breathe. I'm sorry. Yifeng's voice was a little apologetic. Ning Shuamore finally breathed evenly. She looked at him and asked, "Do you have something on your mind?" Yifeng was a bold and careful secret guard. If he didn't have anything on his mind, he would have paid attention to the cat in his arms all the time, instead of waiting until she was suffocating to find out. Yifeng was stunned. He lowered his eyes and didn't say anything. He did have something on his mind, and it was Yang Ziyuan. The first thing he wanted to do after he got out was to see her, but he didn't dare to. Ever since he knew that Yang Ziyuan's wedding was in half a month, he had been restless. Although he was already mentally prepared for this outcome, he still wanted to escape when faced with it. It was also because of his uneasiness that he neglected many things during his escape. For example, he had to hide his whereabouts, or his wounds that were still bleeding from time to time. Ning Shuamore's nose was sharp, and she quickly smelled the unique sweet and fishy smell on his body. Her heart sank, and she finally saw the wounds on his body. After all, Yifeng had been pierced through by the black iron chain, and there were 2 huge bloody wounds on his shoulders. Although Yifeng had treated his wounds simply, the wounds were still too big, and blood still oozed out from time to time. She seemed to have thought of something. I heard that Yi Qingwan is a martial arts genius who has 5 types of spiritual roots in her body. Is it true? Yifeng was still a little absent-minded. He nodded subconsciously. I heard so. It's precisely because she's such a rare genius that the ancestor made an exception to accept her. After saying this, his face also changed. If Yi Qingwan had all 5 elements, she should also know the water escape technique. She might follow the water vein and chase after them. He picked up Ning Shuamore and said, "We have to go quickly." Ning Shuamore took a breath. If Yi Qinghuan's water escape technique is very strong, and you are injured, we can't outrun her. We can't escape from her if we run blindly. Listen to my command. She quickly told him her plan. Chapter 652. Yi Feng couldn't help but glance at the cat in his arms. He really didn't expect this girl to be an expert in anti-tracking, even better than him, a professional expert. He was also a man of action. He immediately took Ning Xuemore deep into the water vein and came to a place where the water veins were mixed. This place was like a spider web that extended in all directions, and the water veins were radiating in all directions. Yi Feng dripped the blood on his body into more than 20 water veins, leaving only 3 or 4 without blood. Then he went into one of the blood-stained water veins and continued to move forward along that water vein. The next time he took a breath and returned to the surface, he carefully treated the wounds on his body. There was no more blood flowing from his shoulders. Only then did he return to the underground water veins. In the future, whenever he encountered those kinds of crossroads with mixed water veins, he would drip his blood into all the water veins. The underground water veins were intricate and complicated, and the water was constantly flowing, carrying his blood in all directions. He believed that even if Yi Qinghuan chased after him by following the smell of blood on his body, she would get lost in these crossroads and wouldn't be able to find any trace of him and Ning Xuemore. Because Ning Xuemore was always wrapped in his bubble, not a trace of her breath leaked out. So Yi Feng didn't have to bother to help Ning Xuemore hide her tracks. This idea was thought of by Ning Xuemore, and Yi Feng carried it out very thoroughly. When Yi Qinghuan tracked those water veins, she was indeed confused by the smell of Sharkman's blood at those crossroads, and couldn't figure out their direction for a moment. They had really lost him. Damn it. Yi Qinghuan was so angry that her hair stood on end. Her opponent was too cunning, and it was really beyond her expectations. She was so angry that she wanted to curse and swear, but when she was thinking about it in her mind, she suddenly remembered that she didn't even know the name of the little soul that caused her such a disaster. She couldn't even find the name of the soul. After she chased after a few water veins in vain, she finally understood that such a method of chasing was useless. However, she was not willing to give up just like that. She stopped in place for a moment and decided to rise to the ground. She sent a telepathic message to her trusted disciple, asking him to send the literary letter fish over. The Wenshin fish was best at tracking in the water. They could distinguish the strength of the person they were tracking in the water. Although the sharkman had dripped his blood into the water veins at every fork, the strength of his aura was different from when he had passed through them. She couldn't tell, but the Wenshin fish could. This time, no matter what, she had to catch up with that cat. Capture that little soul alive and slowly execute him to relieve the hatred in his heart. She had used the water route to track him, and the speed of the water route was naturally slower than the speed of flying. Therefore, after her trusted disciple received the message, he brought the fish to her on the fastest blue luan bird. The Wenshin fish did not disappoint. After circling around the water vein, they quickly found the path Yi Feng had taken. However, because there were too many underground water veins and too many forks, although the messenger fish could eventually find the correct path, it would still take a lot of time. In this way, Yi Qinghuan's tracking speed slowed down a lot. After all, she was a person who had cultivated for many years and was scheming enough. To be on the safe side, she ordered her disciples to each ride a rare bird in the air and search along the water route she had taken. Even if the sharkmen didn't need to come to the water surface to breathe, that cat still needed to. Chapter 653. The man and the cat would definitely return to the surface of the water to take a breath every once in a while. She did not believe that the sharkmen would be able to escape from her grasp with the cat and the water at the same time. After the fresh rain, autumn arrived in the late autumn. When Yi Feng brought Ning Xuemore out of the water again, they were in a deep pond in the middle of a mountain. It had just rained outside, and the green grass by the pond was swaying in the wind with countless fine water droplets. The air was so fresh that it made people want to take a second breath after taking a breath. A few stars were twinkling in the sky, and it was already night time. Yi Feng had been running with Ning Xuemore for the whole afternoon. They had already run for nearly 1,000 miles and passed through 200 to 300 crossroads, but they did not see any pursuers. Yi Feng breathed a sigh of relief. He was tired after running for so long, and he urgently needed to eat something to replenish his energy. Ning Xuemore was also very hungry at this time, so the two of them discussed and decided to stay in the mountain for a little longer to eat something first. Yi Feng caught 3 fat fish along the way, and after coming ashore, he made a fire and set it up to barbecue. Ning Xuemore laid on the side and watched him busying himself. She watched as his beautiful fishtail slapped against the ground. Unexpectedly, it was similar to a human's legs. He walked very nimbly on the ground. She held back and finally could not help but say, "Yi Feng, so you also eat fish?" Seeing how he handled the fish so neatly, she could tell that he was an expert. Yi Feng did not stop moving, and said calmly, "Shark men live in the sea all year round, so they naturally eat sea creatures as their food. Fish is their staple food." "That's right, the creatures in the sea are the same as the creatures on land. The weak are prey to the strong. It all depends on who is standing at the top of the food chain. Do shark men usually cook their food like humans do before eating?" Ning Xuemore was very curious. After escaping from danger, her state of mind also calmed down quite a bit. Gossiping cells were starting to grow in him. Yi Feng paused for a moment, and his ocean blue eyes grew somewhat distant. "It's true that it's cooked, but we're using sea fire, not firewood." He handed a grilled fish to Ning Xuemore. "Earlier. I'm sorry if I hurt you." Ning Xuemore knew that he was talking about how he used her to threaten Shuilan on the ship a few days ago. She shook her head and said, "It's okay. You didn't really hurt me." Yi Feng's knife was pressed against her waist at that time. Although she was bleeding, he had stabbed her diagonally. What he had pierced was only a layer of her skin. He did not hurt her vital parts at all. She was indeed hungry. She held the fish in her paws and ate a few mouthfuls. Her cat eyes sparkled. Delicious. "Yi Feng, I didn't expect your cooking skills to be so good." Men with good cooking skills were all good men. If she didn't know that Yi Feng's heart belonged to someone else, Ning Xuemore would have packed him up and kept him by her side. Yi Feng smiled at her praise, but he didn't say anything. Just as he smiled, he seemed to have thought of something. His eyes dimmed, and the smile on his lips slowly turned cold. He wasn't a talkative person. In the blink of an eye, he had finished grilling another fish and was eating it himself. "Yi Feng, the fish you grilled with firewood is also very delicious. It seems like you've been on land for a while." Ning Xuemore chatted with him. Yi Feng paused for a moment. "It's not that long. It's been 3 years. For the past 3 years, he had been quietly guarding Yang Ziyuan, protecting her from all dangers." Chapter 654. Yang Ziyuan was innocent and naive. She didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. She dared to offend anyone and cause any kind of trouble. If he didn't silently clean up her mess behind her back, with Yang Ziyuan's reckless and naive temperament, she would have been killed many times over. The little girl liked to eat grilled fish. For this reason, he secretly practiced the skill of grilling fish with firewood, just to make her happier. Unfortunately, she hated him. Every time he appeared in front of her, she would have a disgusted expression. Helpless, he could only secretly protect her and not easily appear in front of her. Yang Ziyuan didn't even eat the fish he grilled. In half a month, she would be married to that person. In the future, she would be that person's wife, and that person would naturally dote on her. Yang Ziyuan wouldn't be able to eat the fish he grilled. Yi Feng was a little lost in thought. When he ate the delicious fish, he felt that it was a little bitter. Ning Xuemore's eyes moved. She had chatted with Yang Ziyuan before. She knew that Yi Feng had been by Yang Ziyuan's side as a secret guard for exactly 3 years. It seemed that Yi Feng came here specifically for Yang Ziyuan. Yang Ziyuan was a real human. Ning Xuemore knew that she had never been to the sea before from her conversations with her. Because she had once innocently asked Ning Xuemore what the sea looked like, How did a young girl who had never been to the sea cross paths with a sharkman who treated the sea as his home? Ning Xuemo's heart was full of curiosity. After thinking for a while, she asked straightforwardly, Yifeng, you came here for Yang Ziyuan, right? How did you get to know her? Could this be another story about a mermaid? But the main character of the story was changed from a female mermaid to a male mermaid. Maybe it was because the night sky was too beautiful, or maybe Yifeng really wanted to find someone to talk to about his troubles, so he briefly told Ning Xuemo his story. The first sentence he said surprised Ning Xuemo. Yang Ziyuan was also a sharkman in her previous life. Ning Xuemo widened her eyes in surprise. She didn't expect Yifeng's love to involve the past life. Yifeng was not an expert storyteller. What he told was more like a summary of the contents, but Ning Xuemo was able to hear the thrilling story. Yang Ziyuan was also a little mermaid in her previous life. She was abandoned by her parents when she was young and was picked up by Yifeng at that time, and was named Yi Yu. Yifeng had watched her grow up. The two's relationship was like a brother and sister. And Yi Yu always thought that Yifeng was her biological brother. Yi Yu gradually grew up into a slender and elegant young girl. Her beauty was unparalleled. She was also outstanding in the sharkman's tribe. Countless male sharkmen pursued her. Life in the sea was also dangerous from time to time. Other ferocious sea tribes would also hunt sharkmen. If they didn't want to become food for other sea tribes, they had to think of ways to make themselves and their tribe stronger. So most sharkmen were like the people in the world. They were very diligent in their martial arts. Yifeng was one of the best. Every day, other than dealing with the necessary affairs, he spent most of his time practicing martial arts. He wanted to protect his tribe and the people he wanted to protect. After all, Yi Yu was young. She was lively and playful. With Yifeng as her big protective umbrella, she practiced martial arts carelessly. She often pestered Yifeng, wanting Yifeng to accompany her to play. Yifeng naturally didn't have time to accompany her most of the time. Chapter 655. In order to relieve Yi Yu's boredom, Yifeng often searched for some storybooks in the human world for her to read. The source of these storybooks was naturally the merchant ships that encountered strong winds and waves on the sea. Yi Yu did not know which storybook hit her romantic nerve. She did not know when she started to have something on her mind and started to yearn for life in the human world. Just like the story of the Little Mermaid that Ning Xuemo heard, Yi Yu started to pay attention to the passing merchant ships. She often sneaked out to look at the people on the merchant ships. Once, because she peeked out too much and was too close to a merchant ship, she was discovered by a master of psychokinesis on the ship and was almost caught. It was Yifeng who arrived in time and rescued Yi Yu, who was trapped in the net of law. Yi Yu was injured by the net. In his fury, Yifeng overturned the boat with a violent storm, causing the people on the boat to be buried with him. What he did not expect was that the master who almost caught Yi Yu was a master of water. That person was only seriously injured in the storm and did not die. That person was very handsome, elegant. Not only was he a master of psychokinesis, but he was also good at music and played the guqin well. Before the ship capsized, all the women on the ship were moved by his elegant demeanor and were obsessed with him. Yi Yu was also fascinated by his elegant demeanor and forgot about the danger. She was so close to the merchant ship. With the help of Yifeng's medicine, Yi Yu's injury healed quickly and she was alive and kicking the next day. She remembered the man who fascinated her, so she sneaked out and wandered around the vicinity of the shipwreck. She did not know whether it was fate or misfortune, but she actually found the dying man on a reef. A young girl's feelings were always poetic. Young girls were also the most impulsive and reckless when doing things. She was hot-headed and saved the man. She was also afraid that Yifeng would not allow her to save the man, so she did not dare to bring him back to the sharkmen. Instead, she hid him on an isolated island. Every day, she would send all kinds of food and medicine to the man. With enough food and medicine, the man's injury healed quickly and Yi Yu became more and more obsessed with him day by day. Not only did she bring him medicine and food, but she also found his zither at the bottom of the sea for him. That person often played the piano for her in his free time. The man and the shark got along very well. Yi Yu was very naive, and at the age where she was dreaming, she quickly regarded this elegant and romantic man as her Prince Charming. She ran to this island every day to meet this man in secret. Yi Feng had not noticed her because he was busy with the internal affairs of the mermaid race. By the time he realized something was wrong with Yi Yu, it was already too late. Yi Yu was deeply in love with that man and had already decided to follow him to death. Yi Feng secretly followed Yi Yu to the island and discovered the man she was hiding. He flew into a rage. After Yi Yu left, he appeared on the island and fought with the man again. The man's kung fu was not as good as Yi Feng's, so he was injured by Yi Feng again. Just when Yi Feng wanted to kill the man to prevent future trouble, Yi Yu unexpectedly returned. She risked her life to save the man from Yi Feng's sword and accidentally injured Yi Feng, who was unguarded against her. Yi Feng was heartbroken and angry, so he asked Yi Yu to make a choice. She could either go back to the mermaid race with him or go to the mainland with the man. From then on, he would treat it as if he had never adopted her and she did not exist in the mermaid race. Chapter 656. Yi Yu looked at him for a moment, kowtowed to him, and then chose the latter. She carried that person to land. At this point, Yi Feng's voice trembled a little, and the branch in his hand broke into two with a cracking sound. I was seriously injured at that time, and when I saw her carrying that person away without looking back, I was so hurt and angry that I really wanted to cut off all ties with her, so I didn't ask anything about her. Yi Feng took another breath, stabilized his voice, and continued to speak faintly. His feelings for Yi Yu were never that of a sibling. He liked her, so he practiced martial arts with all his might, trying his best to become stronger, just to protect the person he loved. Yi Yu's actions broke his heart, so he started to drink and get drunk, and started to fall in love with other mermaids, and forbade others from talking about Yi Yu in front of him. Yi Feng didn't know at that time that Yi Yu encountered other ferocious sea tribe members on the way back to land, and almost lost her life. He didn't know that she cried and used the conch to call him over and over again, asking him to save her. He was dead drunk at that time, and because he wanted to cut off all ties with Yi Yu, he threw the conch to the bottom of the sea. Not only did Yi Yu's cries not call Yi Feng over, but it also made the other sharkmen, who had once coveted her beauty, rush over to take advantage of the situation. If it wasn't for the fact that they coincidentally encountered a ship, and that there were experts on the ship, perhaps that person and Yi Yu would have died in this pincer attack. That man was saved, and Yi Yu was also brought onto the ship. Although the sharkmen could transform on land and become like ordinary people, they were still members of the sea tribe. When they arrived on land, every step they took was like stepping on the tip of a knife, and every step they took was so painful that they wished they were dead. Therefore, the sharkmen wouldn't go ashore easily. No one in the sharkmen knew what Yi Yu went through after she went ashore. There was a kind of poison in this world called lovesickness, and there was a kind of feeling in this world called unrequited love. The two of them didn't feel anything when they were together, but once they were separated, they would know that the pain of separation was heart-wrenching and unforgettable. Yi Feng suffered the cruelest betrayal from his lover. Although he missed Yi Yu deeply, he didn't want to look for her. He didn't even want to hear any news about her. In order to let himself walk out of this emotional trauma as soon as possible, he accepted the love of another woman from the mermaid clan and got engaged with her. The next time he saw Yi Yu was 3 months later, at his engagement party with sharkmen. Yi Yu came back alone without any warning at all. When he was drinking the engagement wine with his fiancée, he saw Yi Yu standing at the entrance of the hall with a deathly pale face. The moment Yi Feng saw her for the first time, he didn't know what he was feeling. He knew that he had never been able to forget Yi Yu. When he saw the figure that he had yearned for day and night, he couldn't tell if he was angry or ecstatic. He coldly asked her why she came back. He coldly told her that the mermaid clan had removed her name. However, he secretly hoped that she would say a few words. As long as she turned back and called him brother again, he would decide to forgive her and hug her in his arms. However, He didn't expect you to just smile faintly. She said that she came back to ask the high priest of the mermaid clan to split her legs. She didn't want to suffer the pain of walking on land like walking on the tip of a knife. She wanted to be done once and for all. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.